Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grillin' JR with the man himself, Mr. Jim Ross. Jim, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good, man. Couldn't be better. I'm happy to be here with you again, and I'm excited for the folks to join us. We thank you guys for your loyalty and your support, and we hope we're not disappointing you. Our numbers have been great. We're making a dent in what we want to do, so I'll contribute that to Conrad's format and his ideas, and we're having fun. So, and it's been a unique week. You know, I did a little baseball thing last Thursday. Took a couple 3 days off. Got home, and then all of a sudden we realized it was the 4-year anniversary of Dusty Rhodes passing away. That's always a melancholy event, or not event, but a melancholy occurrence for me, because I love the guy, and we had such a great relationship for 3 decades. So, but I know you got some good news regarding Dusty for us here next week.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We didn't really realize that this was the anniversary week, and upon seeing your tweet this week that I think caught a lot of people in the feels when you said you think about the dream every day and you miss him and say hi to Jan, I said, man, we got to call an audible. So next week, instead of covering King of the Ring 94, we'll push that off. We'll do that another time. We're going to celebrate the life and memory of Dusty Rhodes. And normally we have a long career path, and we take you step by step, just the facts, ma'am, sort of using the Observer, and we'll certainly do some of that next week. But I really want to just celebrate the good times and talk about the big moments that you guys shared, because you're not somebody who worked with him a little while. You spent decades with the man. Yeah, and
we were not only, he was so high on my work that I embraced that so much, because Dusty was the guy that would give you positive reinforcement, which was very unusual, and still is to this day within the pro wrestling business. Compliments are infrequent. A pat on the ass. Monsoon said, "You remember now, a pat on the back is only 18 inches away from a kick in the ass," and that's kind of the wrestling theory. So he was just a joy to work with. So creative. Our production meetings for a big show would last maybe 10 minutes. He gave me the drift of where he was headed, and then we created it as we saw it. And he was one of my favorite broadcast partners. Was he the very best broadcast partner? Well, I don't say he's the very best, but he was damn sure good for somebody that sat down to do the commentary, Conrad, and he had a zillion things on his mind. He'd booked the card, he'd produced the show, and so him doing commentary was a joy to me. And I go back through my pictures and see a lot of stuff that he and I did together. Just brought back so many great memories. And of course, we had our running battles, the second Saturday in October, the Oklahoma-Texas game, but she would always correct me and say, no sooner. It's the Texas OU game. Okay, Dusty, whatever. So anyway, next week will be a fun show. A lot of good memories, beer drinking memories, crying memories, laughing memories. Just a hell of a man, and kind of a John Wayne of wrestling to me. He was always kind of that John Wayne type character to me. And so we'll talk about that next week. It's going to be a great show.
I'm excited about it. And I'll tell you, I'm having a lot of fun with this show. Everywhere I look, people are talking about the new podcast. Even if you start to do a Google search for Jim Ross's name, the podcast is near the top. I found myself at lunch this week and someone made the approach and said they love the podcast. And I sort of, out of habit, assumed that they were talking about Bruce Pritchard or Eric Bischoff or maybe even Tony Schiavone, but nope. They told me they've never missed an episode that you and I have done and can't wait till the next one. And it's the talk of the wrestling world. We even got an attaboy from Westwood One that it's outperforming everything else and one of their biggest properties now. And we appreciate you guys' support, and we hope that you'll let all of your friends know about the new format here on Jim Ross's show, Grillin' JR. And we're going to revisit one of the hits, as they say, King of the Ring 1998. We're going to talk about everything that happened on this show, but this has got to be the most, I mean, this is the show where you have a call that's probably the most quoted. I mean, it went viral, as they say. Is this the most notable call you've ever had, you think?
Yeah. It's the most memorable because I get asked about it, if I'm around wrestling fans, it's inevitable. If you and I were to do a Q&A, and we're going to do some Q&As going forward some stage shows, as we've talked about, I promise you there'll be somebody in that audience that'll want to know something about that event in June of 1998. I'm getting ready to board a plane about, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, going someplace, and I'm in the priority line, American priority line, and to pre-board, and this guy and his son's probably 12, 13, they're standing right behind me. And the dad is immediately behind me. And so he gets real close to me, right? And he says, I hear him, he's whispering. I think for a second he's talking to his kid, but he's talking to me. And he says, as God is my witness, he's broken in half. So he commences to quoting all these things I said during that match of Foley and Undertaker at Hell in a Cell at the King of the Ring 98. And so finally he said something else, and I didn't, the kid kind of flew out of my mind, and I turned around, I was getting ready to turn around the guy. I said, okay, buddy, look, I know you're a fan. I appreciate it very much, but you whispering in my ear don't look good. And so I was going to tell him that. And so I turned around, and the kid was not as starstruck as his dad, to be honest with you. But he said, JR, we're sorry. Apologize for the old man. He was just sitting there with his mouth open. Dad, JR, we're sorry. My dad does this all the time at home. He quotes that match every day in some shape, form, or fashion. And my mom hates it. I said, well, your mom's got good taste. So anyway, you never know where you're going to hear it.
Right.
And there's a friend of mine is the starting left tackle he's right tackle or left tackle for the Baltimore Ravens, Orlando Brown. And Orlando played here at OU, coached by Coach Bill Beedenbow, the great line coach, who's my neighbor here in Norman. And Orlando wanted some T-shirts because there's a T-shirt out at Pro Wrestling Tees that says all those quotes are on there. And I think one of them was, they killed him or something like that. He wanted to wear, he got 3 or 4 of those shirts to wear under his shoulder pads. But that's kind of the damn match, and the quotes kind of go beyond just the wrestling world. It just picked up. And I know a lot of guys that I've met guys at ESPN, Fox Sports that will quote them, and they're big timers type thing. So it just happened that those calls stuck. And, it's without a doubt the most memorable night that I maybe have ever had in one match that did not involve a tragedy. It was a near tragedy, and Mick Foley dodged the bullet. Quite frankly, we all did. But it's the most quoted thing that I recall in my career ever.
Well, something we hope you don't recall is the last time you had insects inside your house flying around, ruining your summer. I mean, that's more annoying than bad barbecue, as JR would say. And we've got a solution for you. If you want to get rid of those flies, because man, who knows where they were last. Before they landed on your barbecue, they could have been, well, anywhere. We want to thank our sponsors over at Dynatrap. You see, Dynatrap is the leading manufacturer of outdoor mosquito and insect traps, and now they've come up with a solution for indoor pests, the Dynatrap Fly Light. You see, the Dynatrap Fly Light works day and night, to attract and trap flies, fruit flies, mosquitoes, and other pesky insects. And I've got to say, it really works. Forget those disgusting fly strips. The Dynatrap Fly Light looks like a subtle night light that plugs into any indoor outlet. And trust me, I've been using the Dynatrap Fly Light for months now, and it's insane the number of insects it's caught that would otherwise be buzzing around my house. Get yours right now at Dynatrap.com. That's Dynatrap.com, and enter the promo code JR to receive 15% off of any of their products. And Dynatrap is the safe, silent, and simple solution to household insect control. And this is something that I know you're using right now too, JR, and you're loving it.
Yeah, I am. I built that outdoor kitchen last year here at my house, and it's a fixture out there. You got to deal with it. You can't get rid of them. You can control it, but they're going to come back. But when they come back, guess what you got waiting on them? And I believe in this product. If you're outside much, if you do much grilling, you're outside your family, you're doing family activities outside, and you're huddled in a little area you're eating or whatever, you're going to love this deal because it's odorless, it's safe, and as Conrad said, folks, it actually works. We don't advertise anything on here that we don't endorse. That we don't endorse anything that we don't believe in or use, and this thing works. I promise you.
So check it out, Dynatrap.com. Use that promo code JR, save yourself some money. Let's get to the money of today's episode, though. King of the Ring 1998 went down on June 28th at the Civic Arena right there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Of course, it was a sellout, just like almost everything else in 1998. It drew 17,087 fans. 15,505 of those were paying customers, and it set an all-time city gate record of $539,660. But check this out, nearly 149,000 in merchandise. When you hear about sort of wrestling hubs or hotbeds, you hear about Chicago, you hear about New York, you hear about Dallas, you hear about Atlanta. You don't really hear about Pittsburgh that often. Why do you think that is? I mean, some of the all-time greats are there, Bruno Sammartino and Kurt Angle and Shane Douglas. And, even these days, Corey Graves and Elias, all from Pittsburgh. Why don't you think Pittsburgh has a reputation as being more of a wrestling town?
Well, I guess if we perceive that Pittsburgh is in the quote unquote Northeast of the United States, that the Northeast, the star of the Northeast, as far as wrestling is concerned, is New York City.
Right.
So I think maybe there was a little bit of being in that shadow of New York City as far as being considered a Northeast city. But you're right about the market itself. Bruno Sammartino was like, there was Bruno, then there was everybody else. There was Bruno and there was everybody else. And Mick Foley got trained there by Dominic DeNucci. That was another thing. And a lot of that used to be a little territory hub there. I don't know that Corey Graves and Elias belong in the same conversation with Bruno just yet, but maybe they will someday. I hope they do. But I liked it. And of course, Larry Zbyszko came out of there, was Bruno's protege. Oh, hi, Larry. Larry's that guy. Yeah, JR, can I come on your podcast and talk about Bruno? No, Larry, you can't. He's dead.
Oh my gosh.
I love Larry, but seriously, good talents came out of there. But look, it's like saying, who's the greatest Yankee? Well, that's easy. Babe Ruth.
Sure.
So Bruno was Babe Ruth of wrestling, WWF, Pittsburgh, and anything else in the Northeast. So it was Bruno's town. And of course, my late wife Jan was raised there, went to Shaler High School, graduated from Shaler High School. And she was, of course, my angel. And so I'm close to Pittsburgh. And I do still go to Permane Brothers every time I go to Pittsburgh. And then I take a Lipitor so I don't get my cholesterol crazy. But I love the whole city. Good. It's just a great place. Great place. And man, that crowd that night was jacked. I watched this show last night in its entirety. I watched it again this morning. I enjoyed the whole damn presentation, but Pittsburgh is a special town, and they rose to the occasion on that night.
Indeed, they did. And you guys were experiencing rising gates. We've talked about, year over year, how the business was changing from 94 to 95, 96 to 97. But here from 97 to 98, it's incredible. Your average attendance in June of 97 is 5,687. A year later, come June of 98, we're up 68%. We're at 9,568, and that's your average attendance. Your average gate is actually up 92%. You go from 93,000 and change in June of 97 to over $179,000 in June of 98. And you're selling out 46% of your house shows here. The prior year, you were selling out less than 6%. Ratings, of course, they're way up too. The tide has turned by the summer of 98. You're now beating WCW in almost every category. Television ratings, no exception there. In June of 97, you were getting a 1.7. Here a year later, you're up 58%. You're getting a 2.7. Drastic improvement across the board. We talked a little bit about 97 last week when we covered King of the Ring, and we were talking about, the way the mood was in the office, that, hey, we're at least talking about bankruptcy. It's been discussed because things are tight. A year later, it's a new business, is it not?
Absolutely. Yeah. That Attitude Era talent really connected with their audience, and they all had distinct and exclusive features and benefits to sell. They knew how to get themselves over and how to identify and to connect with the audience. And the other thing and I think this, as we go through the show today, and the Raw after that and so forth, the Raw before and after, you can see the process of needing to make heels. And that's an issue right now. People say, talking about WWE from time to time, about, well, they don't know how to make a baby face. I don't know that to be accurate, but I will say that there is a case to be made that they're not real proficient right now in developing villains, and villains cannot be perpetuated and grown with 50-50 booking. No babyface or heel can. So we were in the process of really developing heels because we had the babyface situation pretty well under control. Austin was getting over. Austin was becoming bigger than life. And they also knew that we were one turn away from having 1A and 1B because Rock was young and hungry on that roster as well. So the babyface side of this whole equation was pretty damn solid. And they weren't the only two, but they were the main horses in that respect. Undertaker, hotter than hell. In 98 was, he was big time, as he is, he will be forever. So, the heels was the issue. So that's what we did. And that was an interesting part about this show today is going to be about focusing on making some heels. But quite frankly, Conrad, the best heel we had during that period of time was Vince.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like that's sort of a footnote in history, because everybody talks about the rise of Steve Austin, but Steve Austin had to have somebody, to oppose. And that opposition has never been stronger than with the Mr. McMahon character. When you look at the success of 98, most people would attribute this massive jump in the rise of Steve Austin. I think maybe what gets lost is the success. He had to have somebody to dance with, and that's Mr. McMahon, but also the writing. And it was a combination of you had this super baby face because you had this super heel, and the writing was perfect. It was exactly what the fans wanted at the time. Do you think we'll ever see that? I mean, everything clicking on all cylinders with the top program, because that really lifted the whole company, the McMahon Austin feud, did it not?
Absolutely. And it eventually led to the company going public. The success of Stone Cold, The Rock, the whole crew, getting over, all being very, very competitive with each other. The locker room was not a martial law environment, but it was a very competitive environment. And it also was a situation where the top guys had no issues conversing with the boss. And I don't know how that plays out today in their company, but the boss, everybody else does a lot of work and everybody else works hard, but Vince is always going to be the guy until he's no longer with us, God forbid. But that's the whole deal. That crew, starting with Taker and Austin, all those guys, they all had an open door to Vince. He'll say everybody's got an open door to him. And I think that's pretty much true. But they took advantage of it and developed a rapport with Vince where they could openly communicate. Remember, see the old man? Converse, don't confront. And that's kind of what those guys figured out. And so a lot of this creativity, not to knock the creative guys, but a lot of the creativity was the talents themselves coming up with ideas to help perpetuate their persona, because nobody knew their persona better than they did. So it was really a unique thing. But Vince will never. He should always get major credit, major props for this, for the Attitude Era success, and then obviously leading WWE as an administrator and owner, and then as a top heel to becoming a public company and $160 million IPO.
Talk to me a little bit about Vince Russo. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about him here on the show, but I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about, perhaps his influence was a critical part of the ingredient, because when I tried to put over the writing, you pivoted a little bit back to, well, it was the talent too. Was it Russo who forged a relationship with some of these guys, and that's what made the writing better? Or was it going to happen with or without Russo?
No, I think Russo had a big part to play in that whole era, and he, for where we wanted to go, to be more bold, to have that attitude, to be a TV 14 product, which was a big change in the climate in WWE. You needed a special group of people with unique personalities to get that done. And he did that. Russo, well, that was him. He was a big fan of Howard Stern, the outrageous, over the top, overzealous stuff at time to time. And Vince McMahon was the guy that reeled Russo back in to give him some, put a bit in his mouth a little bit, but he pretty much let him go. But Russo was smart enough to know that you're not going to get all these ideas that you have in your head through the court system here if you don't have the judge in your pocket, which is Vince, and the key witnesses testifying for you, meaning the talent. So he listened to the talent. That's smart for him. And I think Russo got in trouble more seemingly. I don't know, because I didn't work with him past WWE. He got more trouble when he started being a little bit more autonomous and didn't have that filter, and maybe he didn't have the same rapport with talents in WCW and TNA wherever he went after that. That's just my speculation. But to say that Russo did not have a major hand in creativity during that era would be a lie, and that's not my style. So, we've had our differences, philosophical. We had them then. If we work together, probably have them again now. We just have a different view of what wrestling should be, but that doesn't make him wrong. It doesn't make me right. It just makes us have a different opinion, but he was a key cog in that whole scenario.
Let's talk a little bit about the countersuit that comes down here in late May. WCW is going to file a lawsuit, I guess, on May 18th, and they're trying to essentially mirror the lawsuit that you guys brought against WCW in 96. Of course, back then you were suing, saying that, the Razor and Diesel characters were your property, and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were certainly implying or inferring or, confusing the audience by positioning themselves as outsiders, as Titan employees. So that's the crux of the lawsuit in 96. And now WCW is going to countersue here. And they're going to say that because you guys have shown the CNN Center when you guys were, doing an invasion angle, that they have similar damages. And they've also claimed that, you're showing clips of Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper and Randy Savage. Talk to me a little bit about when this lawsuit comes in, how Vince responds and how McDevitt responds.
Well, the key thing there is you mentioned Jerry McDevitt, another Pittsburgh guy, ironically. We're talking about King of the Ring 98 in Pittsburgh. We have McDevitt and they didn't. That's a big difference. That's a big leg up for the WWE and Vince. I looked at that suit essentially as a nuisance suit, Conrad.
Right.
I never thought it had any basis to move very far up the court system. I didn't see any judges or any the courts spending a lot of time on these arguments. And if we had made the same arguments, I would say the same thing. They seem to be nuisance suits. They got a little publicity. I don't know if it helped anybody publicity-wise, but I thought all along it meant nothing. I remember having a couple of meetings with Vince about it. We called off the dogs and some of the things, the hotline, on-air mentions, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know of anybody there that when we did the Billionaire Ted skits, anybody endorsed it. There may have been some sycophants there. There's always a few of those hanging around. But some of those guys, they would say yes if they would say shit if they had a mouthful. But the bottom, but the bottom line is, it was a waste of time. Did nothing. Didn't increase ratings. Didn't do anything positive. but stir the shit. It made no sense. So I felt the same thing in this lawsuit, the counter lawsuit. It's almost like, okay, we'll show you. We got lawyers too, by God. We got more than you do. Okay, good.
It's kind of fun too, because, whereas you guys were claiming, hey, you're sort of making Scott Hall look and pretend and talk like Razor Ramon, and they try to sue for the same thing, saying, well, you've done that with X-Pac, because that is a carbon copy of Six-Pac with the NWO, and he's not his old 1, 2, 3 kid persona. I do want to mention, we had Jerry McDivitt as a special guest for a live Something to Wrestle in Pittsburgh last year or year before. And as he was our guest, I couldn't believe that this was the line. He said, yeah, as a result of that lawsuit, eventually WCW settled with us and gave us $2 million. And a few years later, we used that same $2 million to buy their company, which I thought was just tremendous.
Oh man. He's the best, man. I went to his wedding. Jan and I did, we were great friends, still am great friends with Jerry. I can tell you this, man. If I were ever in bad trouble and I needed a badass MF as far as a lawyer, he's the guy. He's the smartest, most strategic. He's got great street smarts and an amazingly high IQ. And boy, he's done great work for WWE and made his firm and himself a fortune off of the services he's provided Vince. So, that's a funny story. That's how it went too. They got $2 million, which in the big scheme, how much money is that? Well, it's a lot of money to guys like me and you, but to those billionaires and these big corporations, is not so much. And then that's what WWE paid for the entire WCW library. $2 million. That to me was one of the great steals, with quotes, that I've ever been a part of in the business.
McDivitt, as a sidebar here, how much of an unsung hero is he to WWE's success, do you think? I don't think history really talks about him in that regard. They talk about him when it's time to get somebody out of trouble or whatever. But really, had Neidhart not gotten in trouble that one time and they needed an attorney to sort of, right the ship, WWE's path may have looked a little differently. They had an ace in the hole with him for decades.
Oh yeah. He's major player. I remember, going to a hotel in, New York City to prepare. He prepared me for, my testimony in the Nicole Bass, lawsuit. And, he's genius-like. I was in awe of listening to him. Here's how you present this, and certain words you do use, certain words you don't use. Be succinct, which I have a hard time doing, as fans here could testify. But he's amazing, man. I don't know. I never met another attorney he puts other attorneys. They're in awe of him. He's got a national reputation as one of the best lawyers in America. This is no exaggeration of wrestle speak. This son of a bitch is really, really good. And so he's bailed, I don't want to say bailed out, but he's defended the company honorably and thoroughly and successfully for many, many years. There's no way that all those victories and the progress of the WWE brand would have been as quick or maybe even happened as much if Jerry McDivitt had not been there as the head of the legal side.
Let's keep it moving here, and let's talk a little bit about TSN's Off the Record. The Winnipeg Sun would run an article making fun of the fact that Steve Austin's appearance on that TSN show drew the largest audience in the history of the show. I don't know why they would poke fun at that. It's great success, another feather in the cap for WWF at the time. But you guys had a long-standing relationship with them. Bret Hart was on it. Vince McMahon was on it. What was the relationship with TSN and Off the Record, and why did the WWE allow them so much access? And talk to us about Landsberg, a guy we don't hear about anymore.
Yeah, Michael Landsberg was the host of that show. Michael's a big advocate of mental health. He's suffered from depression over the years. He's been very transparent in his issues. He's helped a lot of people. He still does. Good dude. I was on his show a couple times up there Off the Record. And he asked the questions that you knew the fans would want answers to. He was very well prepared. But I think the TSN, that was one of TSN's favorite shows. That's one of their personal favorites there on their network. And at the time, if I'm not mistaken, we were on that network with wrestling, with Raw and so forth.
That's right.
So it was a kind of a, just cooperating with the network that we were on there. And they always solicit our guests because, just as you mentioned, they drew ratings. It was a big number deal. So, but it was a good thing for us, and it was a positive thing. Michael was not there to butcher us, unlike this the idiots at the Winnipeg Sun were doing on that day. Why the hell would they say something like? You're right. Why would you say something like that? Unless you're weak, unless you're insecure, and your nuts would fit into a fucking thimble. That's what those guys are. Because why would you suggest that WWE getting these great numbers is a joke? I guarantee you TSN didn't think it was a joke.
Nope.
They loved it. And so that's just another example of, it's almost like fat shaming or any other prejudice. All those wrestling people. Well, yeah, we're wrestling people. Where do you live? I used to tell guys, these reporters, I live actually through the week on Uranus, but I commute and I'm here on the weekends to do wrestling. You asshole.
I love you for that. Let's talk about the Junkyard Dog. Unfortunately, we lost him on June 2nd. He passed away way too early, just 45 years old. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring him up to you. Of course, you had a long history with the dog. What's your favorite Junkyard Dog story you can share with us that you haven't shared on a show before?
Oh boy. Sylvester Ritter's real name he was a creation of Cowboy Bill Watts and Ernie Ladd. Other bookers helped him. Buck Robley was a big influence in JYD growth. Cowboy was number one because he saw what he had there. He had a black Superman who looked like a Greek god at the time. Was JYD a great wrestler? No, absolutely not. But he had unlimited charisma, and he could sell tickets on the mic. His verbal skills were basic, straightforward, but he spoke with such conviction and with a sparkle in his eye that you couldn't help but not believe he was telling you the truth. If he said, I'm coming to New Orleans to whip Butch Reed's ass, you better believe he's serious about coming to New Orleans to whip Butch Reed's ass. I used to travel a lot with Pee Wee Anderson. So Pee Wee Anderson, as I mentioned, was JYD's driver. And basically, he was JYD's babysitter. Sylvester, toward his latter days in Mid-South, had little drug issues, like the cocaine. Didn't do that much drinking, but he liked the drugs. And then he liked to smoke weed. Now, I'm not going to knock a guy for smoking the weed, but you don't need, sure as hell don't need to go down that cocaine trail. So Pee Wee would carry a great big money bag, like you get the old school, like a canvas bag you get at the bank, and it had nothing in it but quarters. So it was like carrying around a lead ball, and the quarters were there because at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when JYD would get the munchies, he'd send Pee Wee down the hall to the soda machine or the candy machine in the hotel. Nothing was open. It ain't like today where you can call, Uber Eats and it'll bring your stuff over to you. Not that way. So that was the deal. Pee Wee always carried that great big bag, and I know Cowboy found out about it, and so he got on Pee Wee's ass. He said, you can't be feeding him Hershey's chocolate and all this other stuff at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's getting fat. He's getting out of shape, and and he was, but he had more charisma. There was a situation, Conrad, down there in New Orleans, the Times-Picayune was a daily paper there. They ran a contest many, many years ago, the most famous athlete in Louisiana. And it came down to, everybody thought it was going to come down to Pistol Pete Maravich, a great basketball player who played at LSU and in the NBA for years, and Archie Manning, the father of Peyton Manning and Eli, and that other one, whatever his name is. So anyhow, and then the winner was Junkyard Dog.
Wow.
So if you go to Louisiana and you beat the quarterback of the NFL team, you beat the starting point guard of the basketball team, I would say, my friend, you're over. So JYD was definitely over. That music, it'd be great now because we came out with paying royalties for that Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust, and that was his music. And man, when they heard that music, Who's going to beat that dog? Nobody going to beat that dog. So they loved him, man. Who dat? Who dat? I heard the who dat long before with JYD, long before I heard it for the Saints. Be honest with you. Who dat? Who dat going to beat that dog? Nobody going to beat that dog. That guy. People loved him. He gave impoverished people, whether they're black or white, hope, because he would talk about his humble upbringings, and they could relate to him, and they saw him being successful, big chains around his neck and nice big rings, and so it was just he was a once in a lifetime talent. I don't think there's ever been an African American talent on his level before or since. At one time, he was as hot as anybody, and I can tell you that he was printing money when he went to WWF. He had the first African American action figure, as I recall.
Wow!
And it sold like crazy. So it's just a shame, man, that he died with hardly anything. He fell asleep either coming home or going to his daughter's graduation. And when JYD was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, I made sure that we reached out to his daughter, and we had to get police and detectives or something like that to find her, because she was really off the grid. She wasn't, a wrestling, she wasn't trying to get into business or anything.
Right. But
he had royalties coming. His royalties. That's one thing about the WWE. You get the royalty program is pretty damn solid, and so he had monies. There were monies there accrued for JYD that went to his next of kin, which would be on his daughter. So she was there when he went in the Hall of Fame. But he was a classic dude, man. Great heart, not a malicious bone in his body, really not. But he was his own worst enemy, and but he was a lovable guy. He really was. But I tell you, Conrad, I've been around a lot of guys, Austins and Rocks and Takers and Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flairs. At one point in time, there was nobody more over with his fan base than Junkyard Dog. Nobody.
Let's keep it moving here, and let's talk a little bit about the June 5th show at Madison Square Garden. On top, it's Steve Austin and The Undertaker teaming up to take on Kane and Mankind. It's, of course, a sellout. 19,506 fans, 16,814 of them were paying $391,575. The reason I mention this is it's the largest gate ever in the United States for a WWF event that wasn't a pay-per-view. So bigger than any house show, bigger than any television taping, the biggest non-pay-per-view show ever in history. That's something else, especially when you consider you're just 1 year away from possible bankruptcy discussions.
Yeah, it was a hit. Well, guys got over, I remember putting that card together with Vince. And I can tell you this, Austin and Taker, to a lesser degree, if I recall, neither liked being in tags, but we had a good story going, and that title thing was all, it was all rolling and interesting with Kane and Mankind, and nobody knew who was friends and foes and who could trust anybody. A lot of uncertainty, which is great for wrestling. Unpredictability is a better word probably, but four of our top guys, and they were all over, and getting Mick Foley and Kane over was a bonus, because Mick was, as I said before, we were lucky to hire him because Vince didn't want him there until he wanted to see how I could understand how it was to get my heart broken, which never happened, by the way, at least not for that. And Mick paired up with Kane very well. It was a good thing, man, and that was hey, the WWE's not even selling at the Garden now. As I understand it, I might be wrong, but I heard the holidays they didn't sell it out. That's almost a layup. So these guys are over, and that's why I say when I hear about some of these talents talking about how great they are, why don't you go sell some tickets before because just because you're making a lot of money doesn't mean you're drawing it.
Right.
Some people get paid a salary basically just to stick to make sure they don't leave. But have they really sold the tickets to merit that salary? I question that.
Well, there's no questioning that you guys were doing a great job with the ratings. The June 8th Raw would do a 4.32, Nitro would do a 4.03. Let's talk about that Raw though. There was something on this show that really stuck out to me. You've got George Martin from the New York Giants and Darnell Autry from the Chicago Bears, and they're here to present Mr. McMahon with the Humanitarian of the Year award, when Austin shows up with a black tie and jeans, but no shirt or jacket. And Martin claims that he's representing the Minority Athletes Network and says McMahon gave less money than he promised and his check bounced twice. And then he reveals that his favorite wrestler is Steve Austin. And of course, Austin winds up picking McMahon's pockets of $1,200, gives it to the charities, calls Vince the tightest son of a bitch in the WWF. Out comes Taker with the Druids bringing a casket to the ring, but it winds up being Kane coming out of the casket. Mankind comes from the other side of the ring, and they put Austin in the casket, and then Kane stands on top as he's stuck there. You're a sports guy. How did this association with the Giants and the Bears legends come to be?
Well, I can tell you this, WWE has always been very pro things like Make-A-Wish, etc. And in that New York area, we did a lot of things thanks to the efforts of Suzy Aitchison, who just went in the Hall of Fame this year. Well deserved. Suzy Aitchison going into the Hall of Fame was as deserved as anybody that was inducted this year, in my opinion. So Suzy had a good rapport with George Martin. They did a lot of charity stuff together. And so, but Vince, to his credit, he was being a heel. He didn't really, he won't acknowledge the organization and acknowledge the company's support of it, but he wanted to kind of protect his heel status. So that's why the dialogue was as it was. But George Martin was a big friend of the company. I'm sure George is alive. He probably still is. Great linebacker for the Giants, Bill Parcells teams back in the day. So that was how that went down. But it was a legitimate award, as I understand it. But Vince just wanted to kind of protect the Mr. McMahon side of it and not give the heel any major redeeming social qualities, which is a mark of a good heel.
Without question. Let's talk about the next week's show. June 15th, Raw does a 4.3, Nitro does a 4. You keep that momentum going. June 22nd, Raw does a 4.3, Nitro does a 4.1. So clean sweep here for Raw. Let's talk about that June 15th Raw though. Shawn Michaels, according to the Observer, was at the WWF event for the first time since WrestleMania. Of course he's there because they're doing TV in San Antonio. Quote, the report from those who saw him was that he was, mentally in better shape than he had been in a long time. And he had cut his hair and he was able to sit down and stand upright for periods of time without excruciating pain. And you may remember he goes home after WrestleMania 14 with a debilitating back problem. You can see him grimacing through the match. He's just not in good space physically, mentally, emotionally. So when you see him here, he's moving around a little better. He's got a haircut. What did you think? Do you remember seeing Shawn at TV for the first time in a long time? And what were people saying sort of behind the scenes about that? Yeah,
he looked great. And it was heartwarming to see that he wasn't in pain all the time. I think that's probably the biggest issue. Whether we thought he would ever come back or not, I always did. That's why I made the effort to keep in touch with him. And that's why I went to San Antonio on, I think, more than one occasion to meet with him and his attorney. And, I was just so honest with him. He needed to have the honesty thrown at him. And I can't remember his attorney's going to skip something, a nice guy. But, I said, you don't want your legacy to be this, that you went home and never came back because of a bad back. I mean, there's things you can do. And he said, well, I can't, he got a little angry. What can I do? I can't move around like I used to, blah, blah, blah. So, well, you can when you get healthy. I said, but until then, having a guy like you in the locker room, in our locker room, and you got to understand, Shawn, for a lot of these guys, these young guys we're trying to hire, you're the role model. You're the guy that got them interested in wrestling, to a large degree. They pattern their game, some of these guys, after things that you do. So I said, there's a lot of things you can do to help the company. And I didn't want to throw out the damn thing. Well, hey, look, by the way, we're paying you $750K a year on a weekly check. So, you're getting paid well, and I know that you'd probably want to contribute, and, and I said, you can do a lot of good things for us. So it was great seeing him there. That was a big breakthrough for him to venture back into that atmosphere, to that environment, because at one time, Conrad, it was when he first left after that WrestleMania you spoke of, nobody was really sure he would ever see him again. And if we did, it might be after 4 years, and then maybe he'll go down south. Who knew? We didn't know. A lot of unanswered questions.
Well, something that wasn't unanswered is what's going to happen with the WWF programming on Raw. USA inks another deal for 3 years here. It's reported in the June 8th Observer. Talk to me about what that process looks like. I mean, once upon a time when ratings are what they are, but they're not necessarily gangbusters, you've got to be just glad to have the opportunity. Now that you're on top of the world, are you getting a better deal? Or are you very appreciative that you had a partner when you needed one? Does that relationship change when the tide turns business wise?
I don't think so. The Vince had a lot to do with the relationship built with USA, and Bonnie Hammer was. I think she was in Power, or was sort of involved. She was a big player there that got along well with WWE. Our ratings started coming back. The thing about it is that if you look at the big picture, Conrad, the ratings that USA were earning on other shows that they're paying a lot of money to produce or they bought were less than what we were earning, even when we were in a little bit of a slump, when we were getting our ass kicked 83 weeks in a row. But the relationship was good. That helped because here's another deal. Being in Stamford and in Connecticut is a 30-minute drive to New York City. It was almost like we're all local in that regard. So they could see each other often. They communicated well, and Vince had some good people around him in that world that also took up the slack. So we had a good relationship with the USA and in that time, because we were still delivering good ratings. And then when the ratings really started going up, we were the bull of the woods, as Dusty Rhodes might say. So that's how that worked, and it's a staple. She fought for us. She fought for us big time to keep us on Monday nights, keep us in prime time. And so it was a real good, positive, win-win business relationship, which seemingly are few and far between nowadays, but that's what you always look for.
One of the things I wanted to ask about when I started to do this research is something that happened very briefly called pay per listen. Meltzer would report the WWF pay per listen for the Over the Edge blew out the circuits because so many people ordered it at the last minute. So everyone who ordered that show will now be given the King of the Ring broadcast for free. It's still sort of the infancy of the internet, but talk to me a little bit about pay per listen when you first heard about it, what Vince thought about it, just what you remember about it, because it does feel like something that is very 1998.
Yeah, and when I saw our format and I started trying to think about this, honestly, I have very little memory of it because we must have tried it once or twice, if that. We did try to do radio WWF at one time, and it just needed a good syndicator, and we didn't have that, so the infrastructure wasn't there. So the audio thing was just, we're going to sell, on this occasion, JR and the King audio, and whatever else, natural audio, and for a cheaper price for people that just wanted to listen and not watch, or wanted to save money more specifically. But I think it was a short-lived deal. I always loved, and when my first meeting with Vince in Augusta, when I was leaving WCW, coming to WWE, we talked about the radio network. We talked about hotlines. We talked about audio. And it's funny that you and I are doing well now doing audio, and it's funny how that all started. Of course, that was preceded by my radio show I did for a good while in Atlanta on WSB. So the audio was a big component of our discussion. It was something that we tried, but for whatever reason, again, it could have been infrastructure-wise and not having the personnel that knew what they were doing to manage it. But I thought it was a decent idea. It almost like a paid podcast, like the paywall or something. But it didn't. It just didn't last long.
No, it didn't. And it's a shame too, because it could have continued, but I mean, it was maybe a little bit ahead of its time. At the end of the June 22nd Raw, which is the go home edition for the King of the Ring show, Austin is going to do a promo here challenging Kane to come out, and Kane's going to come out and make some sort of motion. And then all kinds of red liquid comes from the cage to give the impression that it's raining blood on Steve Austin. Talk to us about the magic behind that. What was the liquid? How was it put together? This feels like it's a precursor for Gangrel's bloodbaths.
Yeah, probably was idea borrowed from that deal. I think it was obviously water based. I'm not really versed on all that stuff. They had a good prop crew there that did all that stuff, and I would think that was probably a Russo idea. Sounds like something he'd come up with, but it was a very viable graphic. I mean, a video rather. The picture was very, very strong, but I'm sure it was just water based, and because you got to make sure it's not, if it gets in your eyes or your mouth or you swallow whatever, you're not going to poison somebody or blind somebody. So that kind of deal. It was very graphic, but the gravity of the angle leading into first blood, et cetera, was that's what it called for. So it was very effective. And so if Russo did come up with it, I think he did. Hats off to him.
One of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is the fact that the Friday before the pay-per-view, Austin goes into the hospital in Houston. He's got a staph infection in his right elbow, which of course results in a super high fever, allegedly as high as 104 degrees. So that's clearly not something you want to mess around with. And they wanted to have him hospitalized through Monday, but we know that's not going to be the case. He's got a pay-per-view to get to. Mm-hmm. Allegedly the bad elbow bruise took place at the television tapings at either San Antonio or Houston. And by Wednesday he had a mild fever. He's booked on some smaller shows in Corpus Christi and Tyler. And, he's in great pain and has to be taken backstage after the show. When you hear this is happening to your top star, your pay-per-view main event, do you start making backup plans? Like, hey, what if we lose our main event? Here's what we could pivot to. Or did you always think hook or crook, he'll be there?
The latter, hook or crook, he's going to make it. Taker was hurt that week too. Taker had a bad foot, bone spurs, et cetera, et cetera. Hey man, they're war horses. They had worked their asses off and through the territory system to get to this level of a global superstar, not a territory superstar, but a global superstar. And they damn sure were not going to relinquish it very much. It reminds me of that commercial years ago that Clint Eastwood did about his guns. You'll take my guns, or maybe Charlton Heston, somebody said, you'll take my guns through my cold dead hands or something. You'll take my spot through my cold dead hands. That's kind of the theory I was thinking. And, but we didn't have I don't know that we had a plan B. Those things are, that would have been, that's the wrestling business. The great thing about it is there are some interchangeable parts. Some are less than, obviously. We'd have come up with something, but I don't know what it would have been at this moment in time. Nobody's going to replace Austin. You can substitute for him. You're not going to replace him. But we always thought that he's going to make it, and he was adamant that he was going to make it. And so the fever broke, but he competed and performed with a lot of pain. And that I remember he looked like the goddamn Bionic Man coming out there in that '98 King of the Ring match with Kane. Big knee braces, as we all remember. Now his elbow's all screwed up. So Steve Austin really was the Bionic Man on that night, and he just gutted it out and got his job done and got the work done. So no plan B, Conrad, but we just had belief that he's going to saddle up and go.
Let's talk about the Undertaker. You mentioned he had a foot injury. Meltzer would call it an ankle injury. He says it was a cracked ankle, which he thinks resulted in some bone chips, and it was all from an angle that was shot on location for the June 16th taping in Austin, Texas. Now you may remember this is where he was at Paul Bear's house, tearing it up. And that's before it airs on June 22nd. There wasn't a noticeable spot on camera where he was injured, but ironically during this angle, Paul Bear also suffers an ankle injury, which Meltzer freestyles is when the Undertaker was throwing furniture around, something landed on his leg. Although of course his role is going to be more limited than Undertaker. He's still not going to appear to manage Kane on the shows for the rest of the week. And they're going to use the television beating as the storyline excuse. So when your two top dogs go down with injuries, you would think this would be cause for concern, but them being war horses, maybe not so much. I do want to mention something else that made the Observer. Messwood right. There have been some reports going around, including some fairly significant press in Japan, about the World Wrestling Federation being interested in buying the Minnesota Vikings. There's been, to the best of my knowledge, no mainstream media report on this in the United States. What we do know is that a company meeting on June 12th, McMahon told some of the higher ups that he was interested. One would think the Vikings, since they would go for a few $100 million, would be way out of McMahon's league, although McMahon could head up a group of investors. Officially, the word from Titan is only to the extent that there has been dialogue. Well, obviously everybody listening to this knows you're a big football fan, and we know that the XFL is a thing back then and will be again soon. When did you first hear the rumor about Vince trying to buy the Vikings, or did it happen? What do you remember about it? Chat me up.
Vince talked to me about that because he knew, and sometimes begrudgingly, of my love for football. You know, Vince had a good deal I had a great deal with him in the sense that I didn't have any hobbies. He knew I needed to have a time to stick my head above water occasionally. So he would fly me and Jan, if she wanted to go, to the OU games when we were living in Connecticut. So I would go to OU games on Vince's dime, fly first class, took great care of me. I'm very appreciative of that. So he knew I was a football mark, for lack of a better term. And so he talked to me about it, and not to give my blessing or just a general, because he had not kept up with football. But I don't think it ever got past the talking stage, Conrad. I don't think it ever got no major meetings with the Vikings, or, he may have had a casual meeting with some investors or something. But I think bottom line is that it was just a talking thing. They were on sale. They were on sale. They were for sale. And but he I don't know the seriousness of it. Long shot at best, but there was dialogue.
Isn't it amazing too to think, what if though? And I know that's a weird game to play sometimes, but if he had bought the Vikings, odds are pretty good the XFL would have never existed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I can't see that happening.
It's fascinating to me. Well, let's talk about the show. Let's get into King of the Ring 1998. You watched it this week for the first time. Is this the first time you've seen it since it happened?
All the way through. Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure a lot of people are watching it this week for the very first time. This is going to set a record for Pittsburgh, as we mentioned earlier. And you guys have been there a lot. SummerSlam 95, which is a rematch from the ladder match at WrestleMania 10. The NWA actually held a record for many years with the Great American Bash in 87, which is pretty amazing because it's always, at least to me, been a more historical WWF city. Let's get into the first match. It's the Headbangers teaming up with Taka Michinoku to take on Dick to Go, Men's Te'ao, and Funaki. It's an unannounced match. Feels a little thrown together based on, they didn't really promote it too much, but they got 2.25 stars in the Observer, and lots of interesting characters here. It does feel like the Headbangers are maybe a little out of place, but what'd you think of the match? Watching it this week for the first time in a long time.
Good opener. I thought. A lot of action, good spots, and a feel-good finish. Good opener in that respect for that era. The Contact Kids did a good job. It's good to see Taka back doing things with New Japan. He's still around, but he was a hell of a hand. He's part of the star of that group, in my opinion. But Funaki, who now lives in San Antonio, mentioned that earlier. He stayed in the States, so I'm assuming he's a citizen by now. I'm not real sure, but that Men's Tale was a good hand. He kind of disappeared, I believe. And Dick to Go, Mr. Barnett's favorite carryout. Oh my God, I love the Dick to Go. He was a good hand too. So I think Funaki and Taka were the 2 stars of that quartet. And but it was a good opener. Did everything he needed to do. Get the people up, get them to react, and get them a little invested in the match, because the match was not star laden, but it was talent laden. All those guys could work, and they did a nice job for the opener.
We haven't talked much about the Headbangers. I gotta admit, I kind of dug the Headbangers. I thought they had good matches and were maybe underrated a little bit. Mm-hmm. Whose idea was the Headbangers? Is that a Russo gimmick?
I think it was actually Jim Cornette's idea.
Really?
I think Cornette created the Headbangers. If I recall correctly, I could stand to be corrected, but Yeah, they did a good job. They're good guys, and they worked hard. Glenn Ruth, Chaz Warrington, reliable. You know, I talked about reliability. They always are on time. They're always at work. They're always working hard. You know, they should have probably got a little bit more of a push than they did, just as a straight tag team. But they were good guys, and they probably don't get the credit they deserve as a tag team in WWE. And they meshed very well with those 4 Japanese fellas, and they ended up, like I said, they had a nice opener. But they're a good team. They were a good team, and probably looking back at it, hindsight, there could have been more mileage achieved with them if they had been given the ball a little bit more prominently, but that didn't happen.
Talk to me a little bit about Gimmicks. Do you think that those guys, had they been given a different gimmick, may have had, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, did the headbanger gimmick limit their upside? Because it does feel like you never hear anybody say anything bad about either one of the guys. As you said, reliable, good worker, things like that. Were they a victim of a gimmick that just sort of pigeonholed them into, well, that's where they are?
Perhaps. Bad answer for you, but perhaps. Many didn't have a problem with it, and I certainly did not. I think the main thing that some older school guys, even older than me, that were on the staff, couldn't understand how a talent in wrestling, how a male wrestler could get over wearing a skirt. So silly as that, but it could have hampered them a little bit. I liked their gimmick. I liked it. It fit their lifestyle. It was current with the times.
Isn't that weird though?
Metal
that guys
stuff.
Would think that, this is a world where Roddy Piper exists. I mean,
I know. Makes no sense, but they weren't Roddy Piper.
Right.
So, but yeah, it could have been that. It could have been some of that, Conrad, without a doubt. But personally, for me, I liked the gimmick. I had no issues with it whatsoever. I thought they played it off well, but we could have done a better job of positioning them to where they didn't come off, and taking consideration that their gimmick needed some explanation. They could have probably got over a whole lot more if there'd been a nice string of vignettes done to explain what a headbanger is. You know, some bitch in Muskogee or Dothan might not know.
Right.
So I don't think we did a good job of explaining that to them.
All right, let's get to the next match here. We've got, well, before we get to the next match, we should talk about the fact that Sable came out looking, as Ric Flair would say, as only she can look. Meltzer. Yeah, it was hard. It was like a sore Peter. That was hard to beat. Meltzer would write, before the next match, Sable walked to the ring without tipping over, which I don't know why, but Meltzer really took a lot of shots at Sable back then. And she introduces Vince McMahon, who of course comes out with his stooges, who are going to become big characters on the show, Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe. As Sable goes to leave, Pat pats her on the ass, and Sable turns around and slaps Patterson. And you make a remark about him being in a place he's never been in before or something like that. And then McMahon does an interview, and he talks about how Kane was going to win the title. And at ringside, wearing an Austin 316 shirt, was heavyweight boxer Michael Moore, cheering McMahon, apparently not realizing what was going on. But you don't really acknowledge Michael Moore being in the crowd. McMahon, though, is going to be criticized by Meltzer. He would say, McMahon did easily the worst interview since he's been playing this role, as he came off like a green independent manager, insulting the fans, and went on far too long trying to get the cheap heat. And when the show was over, it was clear, due to injuries of Undertaker and Austin, that they were adding matches and segments to kill time, as the show ended about 10 minutes early, even after adding 2 new matches. And they showed more replays of Patterson being slapped by Sable. Is this accurate, that you guys were just trying to kill time because you knew 2 of your dogs were down and you were going to have to make up some time somewhere?
Yeah. The show was short. The show was formatted, and it was short on time. No matter if we added or not added, it was short on time. So, and the other thing is that we weren't sure how long Steve could work in the main event because of his staph infection. Had no idea. And of course, then you got Taker's situation. We got him in a Hell in a Cell match with a bad foot, ankle, whatever. So, but the show overall was underwritten in that regard. So a couple of matches were added, and they weren't like they were just bullshit matches. They were good matches. So, the matches that were added were solid matches, but the show was underwritten, and we had to cover our bets a little bit, hedge our bets, with Steve and Taker both being banged up. So that's where that was. I think Vince's promo. Let's do it again. Like I said, yesterday and today, he might have tried too hard to get personal with the audience. It might have been that he was trying too hard to generate some heat, which he felt like was needed, and I can't disagree with that. You can't get too much heat as a rule. Can, but very rarely. And he was being a villain. But I think he might have tried too hard on that one. And there's where he could have had a filter and said, Vince, I don't think you need to say this, or you already made that point twice, or whatever. I don't know if it was his worst interview. It's all subjective anyway, and Meltzer's got his own opinions, and he has a right to them. I wasn't turned off after going back and hearing it again the last couple of days by any stretch. What I suggest folks do when they hear our show, go watch it. Right. You make the call. That's easy. And you got an opinion too. And your opinion, folks, is just as valid as Conrad's or mine and even Dave Meltzer.
That's fair to say. I think a lot of times people get caught up on, what they read or what they hear, and that becomes the gospel. But so much of this is just sort of your opinion, right? Yeah,
that's all. It's a take. If you and I are driving down the road and somebody's riding with us, or we got a driver in a Uber and we're drinking. Hey, what, you boys football fans? Yep, we sure are. Who's the best college football program in America? They would say that'd be Alabama, Oklahoma. Well, it's some team ends with a vowel.
Right.
We could say that. We'd agree on that, but it's an opinion.
Right.
But that's kind of what Meltzer does for a living. He provides a seasoned expert opinion, a take on the business. So, but I wasn't offended by the interview whatsoever, because the thing with Patterson, Briscoe's animation, being animated, it was always entertaining as hell to me. And then when Pat hit Sable on the backside, let me tell you something. I did hear before the show that she was instructed because she didn't know how to work. She didn't know how to throw a punch.
Right.
She didn't know how to do a slap. So she slapped the ever-loving shit out of Patterson. And it popped. And so, and to me, of course, Misery Loves Company. I also like America's Funniest Videos to watch fat women slip on ice, but that's me. I'm sadistic. I thought it was just hilarious. So I think that little interaction with Patterson and Sable on the exit, if anything, if you thought the interview was bad with Vince, that kind of salvaged that segment a little bit to me.
No, I wouldn't disagree. I think that's what people remember, but what you may remember most about this show is I believe this is the show where Pat found out that his, longtime partner, Louie, passed away from a heart attack. And Louie was a staple with the company for a long time. And obviously being Pat's partner, you were probably pretty familiar and friendly with Louie. What can you tell us about Louie, and then how you guys got this unfortunate news?
I actually think Louie passed away just a few days before this, Conrad, I believe, because I want to say it seems like we were in Maryland, at one of the little towns in Maryland doing TV. But nonetheless, you're right about the basic timeline. Louie was a barber, hairstylist, but he had a real successful barber shop in San Francisco. And he and Pat lived in San Francisco for, Pat worked that territory for Roy Shire for, well over a decade, probably 15 years. But Louie because he was Pat's significant other, Louie had a great mind for wrestling. Louie was a sharp guy, and he understood the business. He understood all the little nuances because Pat would share that with him. And then of course the phone would ring, and I remember it's always some agent calling. We'd be sitting around having a drink or eating. I was there at their house at least 1 or 2 days a week. When Jan flew, she was based out of Philadelphia, so she would take a train from Connecticut down to Philly and catch her flight to go to work. And then same deal. She'd come back to Philly, then take the train home to Connecticut. but I was there. I was like a permanent America's guest. And Bruce, our other podcast partner, Bruce was there a lot, but Bruce was married and he's home like a husband should be more often than not. And I was not. I was married, but my wife was gone. So I really enjoyed being around Louis. Great cook. He made this great chimichurri sauce for the stuff, great spaghetti sauce. And I remember Jan loved their dog Buddy. They had a big old kind of a mixed breed, like a German Shepherd and something else, big dog. And Buddy loved Jan, and Jan loved Buddy. And they didn't want Buddy eating treats, but she would bring these little treats over for Buddy every time she came over. And Pat would grumble and bitch, moan, and Louis would just kind of tolerate it, because Buddy was like their son. So I'm not being facetious either. People that got pets they love understand that.
Sure.
But Louis was a good man. But Louis loved to give you his philosophy of things, life, all kinds of stuff. I remember sitting around when I got hired. I didn't have a specific stuff to do, and I was really getting bored. And he said, "Well, you just need to chill, because sooner than later, with your skill set," he said, "I can tell you, Vince already likes you. You're going to be really, really busy much sooner than later." And lo and behold, he was exactly right.
Yes, you were. In the King of the Ring semifinale, we've got Ken Shamrock and Jeff Jarrett. They go 5 minutes and 29 seconds. It gets 1 star in the Observer. Meltzer would say the crowd wasn't into this match at all. The two didn't miss any moves, so there was nothing wrong with the match, but they didn't have time to build and they had no heat going in. Shamrock nearly killed himself when he did a running Hurricane Rana, and in turning over appeared to hit his head on the mat and then clamped on the ankle lock for the submission. Not the best match. And, this is an interesting time for Jeff Jarrett because it feels like he's got a big presentation. He's got a manager. He's, got a catchphrase. He's got pyro. But for whatever reason, it's not connecting with the audience. What do you remember about this match and what did you think?
I've always believed that if two talents are over, that if you're restricted on time, you can still, I don't want to say salvage a good match. You can tell a good story if you're both over. If you got something going for you when the bell rings to start your contest. And Kenny was going up, but Double J had not gotten quote unquote over at that time. So there was not a great interest in that situation. His presentation, I think he had Colonel Parker with him at that time. I don't know what name I can't remember what name he used, but nonetheless, he was a talented son of a gun, and a hell of a hand in his day.
Tennessee Lee, I believe is what he called himself.
Yeah. There you go. Some stereotypical Southern horse shit.
Sure.
So that's the mentality there sometimes, but that's like Vince wanted me to wear those jackets that Porter Wagner used to wear on a TV show that had those wagon wheels on it and rhinestones and all that shit.
Yeah.
That was proposed to me one time. I said, I'll wear the hat all you want. I got to liking the hat eventually, but I said, I ain't going to, come on. I had no credibility, Vince. I look like a fucking clown. I want to get these guys over. We need to get Pound over. We're not drawing any money.
Right.
So he backed off that idea, but I don't think that the audience ever accepted that combination in a serious way. It's not an indictment on either guy. It just didn't click at that point in time. Now, Jeff finally got over when he started affiliating with Road Dogg. And Road Dogg was the star of that combination because he had more charisma than Jeff did. Great talker. The roadie, it was great. And Brian's been still contributing there all this time. So they weren't over. So if you got two talents that are not over, it wouldn't make a shit, Conrad, contrary to what Meltzer might say, if they had 15 minutes.
Right.
They still ain't going to get up. They're not going to get the people emotionally invested because they're trying to get over and they're not. So that's kind of where we were there. I didn't think the match sucked. It wasn't a great match. And because, again, it shows that the crowd can have such a predominant influence on our perception of a performance. And, they worked, like the Meltzer said, they didn't miss any moves.
Right.
It's just nobody cared. I didn't think also maybe, I've thought of this before too. I'm not so sure that people really thought Jeff could beat Shamrock.
Right.
And that probably had a little bit to play into it too.
Yeah. I mean, when you've positioned him to be the, you know, America's badass, the world's most dangerous man, it's hard to imagine that the, fake ass country singer is going to beat him up.
Correct.
In the other semifinale, we've got Rocky Maivia getting a win over Dan Severn here in 4 minutes and 25 seconds. Meltzer hated it. He gave it a negative half star. He called it awful. Said it also had no heat. What do you think? This is not, the best match for either guy, but this match sort of sums up Dan Severn's WWF career. He had, you know, some success on the independents. And of course he was with you guys for a little while, but for whatever reason, it never really clicked. And it felt like it didn't really click in this match either.
No, you're right. Meltzer didn't like Dan Severn taking a pinfall loss, because it was going to hurt him in Japan. And I really appreciate Dave's, loyalty, his dedication, his fandom of all things Japan, and has been that way for years. I've learned a lot about Japanese wrestling from Dave, but the world doesn't start or end in Japan, nor does it start or end here in America. But you know, sometimes I think that Japanese stuff is given more credence, more weight than maybe it deserves. Not sure. It's my opinion. I like it. I enjoy doing their matches, but I think sometimes Dave's a little bit biased as it relates to the Japanese thing. Dan Severn was a guy that I hired, and I'm proud that I hired him. I just saw him at Starcast in Vegas.
Yep.
He's a class act, Conrad. He's a class act. I don't know how your dealings was with him in Vegas.
Phenomenal.
He's educated, grounded, level-headed, amazing amateur background. And we all knew, we'd watched, we were a lot of MMA fans, including myself, and knew that Kenny Shamrock and Dan were 1-1 against each other. It just seemed to be too predictable that they would meet in the finals. Plus, I don't think that any of us were overly confident that they had the chemistry to perform a worked pro wrestling match to any large degree to be the king of the ring. It just didn't feel right. And I think that, you got to understand too, that there was all kinds of, Shamrock was way outnumbered out there. D'Lo Brown comes in with that silly gimmick I gave him about the chest protector, needed the Big Frog Splash. He had all the Nation guys in and out around. And by the way, he did the honors for The Rock. So, and of course, he wasn't The Rock then. He was Rocky Maivia, but the same guy.
Right.
So I don't think it, and then Meltzer thought that, well, this really ruined his career internationally. Danny Severn, to my knowledge, has still been booked since then. A lot.
A lot, yeah. So
apparently it didn't ruin his career, as was written there, but that's kind of what we went with, and we knew what we wanted in the finals. Anytime you see a tournament book, folks, the way pro wrestling tournaments are booked, you go to the finals, and you might even say you go to the winner. Who do you want to win the tournament? And then how do you work it backwards? You work it all the way back to the very first match of the tournament, and we wanted Shamrock and The Rock to be in the finals. They had a little issue on TV that had some history, and they had good chemistry. They like working with each other. Kenny had no issue selling for The Rock because, he admired The Rock's athleticism, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, The Rock had no fear of nothing, and he could make anybody look good more often than not. So we knew that was our final. And unfortunately, Kenny didn't have a place in that, but he's a class act. Kenny never had the overwhelming television charisma that the audience demands more often than not. But boy, as a human being, we never had a guy in our locker room that was a better human being than Dan Severn.
Let's go to the next match. I guess we should mention that Shamrock had to beat Mark Henry and Kama to get here. Jeff Jarrett had to beat Farouk and Mark Marrow to get here. The Rock had to beat Vader and Triple H to get here. Severn had to beat D'Lo and Owen Hart to get here. So that's sort of the background of how we got here. I do want to mention that Dan Severn did an interview on the internet around this time, and when he was asked if there was more than a professional rivalry between himself and Ken Shamrock, he said something like, he doesn't like anyone who isn't natural. And he went on to say, let's just say he doesn't get his body by just working out. But then again, most of the bigger guys in wrestling didn't. And when he brought up about Shamrock admitting to doing things in the past, Severn said something like, I don't know if it's so much in the past. So he's sort of tongue in cheek saying, hey, he's on steroids, guys. Does that make its way to the office? What do you guys think about Severn doing an interview like that?
Well, it wasn't advised to talk about the steroid situation concerning the legacy of steroids in the WWF back in the day. But you know, he expressed his opinion, and we thought, well, you know, it's probably just going to add more fuel to the fire when they do finally work, because that was the plan coming in when we hired. When we got them both hired. We had definite talk about doing a Severn and Shamrock program, but just not in the finals of the King of the Ring.
Right.
So, but no, Danny's very outspoken, but Danny's honest. He wasn't trying to stir the shit as much as he was answering a question and gave an honest answer as he saw it. So at that point, you know, you hope that, well, maybe they'll add a little log to that fire. And if we finally get to Shamrock and Severn, people want to see it.
I know this sounds crazy, but you worked in talent relations for a long time. So I've got to ask, did you guys ever have some sort of coaching with a PR person or yourself or anything like that about, okay, guys, if you're doing an interview and something like this comes up, here's a couple of key phrases or go-to statements you can slide to so you don't put yourself or the company in a bad position?
Honestly, no. I'm sure they do today, I would think. You know, we didn't have the size staff that the talent relations department has now, and all the players involved, performance center, et cetera, et cetera. We didn't have that big a staff, you know, so we didn't have the bodies to go around. And I'm thinking it's a great idea, but you know, we saw something. The internet was not nearly as prominent as it is now, obviously.
Yeah.
Gosh. So we didn't have any official meetings about it. You just hope the guys would use their common sense and their logic when they did an interview. And a lot of times the interviews we set up, you know, with a newspaper in the local market, whatever. But we didn't have that many problems with it. And quite frankly, other than mentioning the steroid issue, which you can't really run from, you just don't want to bring it back up.
Right.
You can't sweep it under the rug. Let's just not bring it up as a topic of conversation. But I don't remember talking to. I remember talking to Dan, and you know, he just was a matter of fact with it. He wasn't like, well, Kenny, I don't like Kenny. Never that.
Right.
He just was a matter of fact and answering the question, and so it's kind of hard to get pissed off at him when he's probably telling the truth.
Let's get to the next match here. We've got Brian Christopher teaming up with Scott Taylor. Of course, we know what that's going to become one day, and they're going to take on Al Snow and Head. That's right. That's real here. The stipulations are, if Snow and Head lose, then Snow has to leave the WWF. And, yeah, this is really the first time we see, Christopher and Taylor on national TV like this. Of course, we know they're going to go on to be Too Cool. What'd you think of their first outing like this? And, most importantly, what'd you think of the finish? And let me mention that Lawler's involved here, and Head is an active participant.
Head is the mannequin Head was Al Snow's tag team partner.
It is. And they find a way. I know what you're thinking. Well, that's fucking ridiculous. How can you pin a Head? Well, they thought of that. Brian Christopher gets a bottle of Head and Shoulders shampoo. Probably the Head had dandruff. I don't know. And he puts Head on top of the bottle and then covers the shoulders of Head and Shoulders, the bottle of shampoo, and Lawler counts 3 because, inanimate objects can't kick out. Negative 2 stars. And you even acknowledge in commentary that this is a travesty to have this on television, which is probably the first time you've just outright admitted, boy, this sucks. What'd you think?
I thought it sucked. And, you know, wrestling fans are smarter than some of the administration and every company that I work for are given credit for being. Omnipotent bookers sometimes look down at the wrestling audience like they're peons, pissants, or whatever. and they don't have any brains. That infuriates me to have that dialogue with somebody. It was an embarrassment. It was a lousy, creative idea, and sometimes, you know, Vince's deal that he would save face or try to save face for his writers, not emasculate them, because I had a problem with that sometimes. It was, it was a let me up segment. Oh, the show's too heavy. Heavy meaning dramatic, whatever. So it was a let me up segment, a little comic relief. I understand that concept, and I don't disagree with the concept. It was just crappy entertainment, and it just was ill-conceived, and I basically said as much on the air, which did not, I don't think I got any Christmas gifts that year from the writing staff.
I mean, it sucked. It's one of the worst things you've called. I guess we should mention, though, that Al Snow came up with the head gimmick while he's in ECW, and a few months prior to this, it was one of the hotter things. Even a month prior to this, in May, he headlined an ECW pay-per-view. I think it was called WrestlePalooza against Shane Douglas. I think that one was in Marietta. He gets over in a major way with this gimmick, and now he's on TV here, and well, he's not in the main event against the world champion. He's against Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor, and his head is his tag team partner, and they put it with Shampoo. Chat me up. Why did WWE take something that was hot in ECW and essentially shit on it?
Boy, I wish I could give you a really insightful, intuitive answer. The WWE has had an issue over the years of being somewhat resistant in accepting proven gimmicks, proven personas that were developed elsewhere, and they change them when they come to WWE. And I don't understand why. You're always going to own the talent's name while they're under contract. That you got that, they signed that away. But then when you go and start changing the names, that means you can't use that name when you leave, that you got all this exposure on. So I don't know the answer to that. To me, is it ego? Could be ego. Is it insecurity? Are there legal ramifications on that stuff? There might be on the name, but not on the presentation. The head thing got over. Al Snow created head, the mannequin head, the head, the inference to fellatio. That's what it was, right?
Yeah, it is. It's just, you're the voice of our childhood and you just drop fellatio on us. I'm going to laugh. Sorry.
It's all right. I can't spell it, but I know what it means. So it got over. And so, yeah, why don't use it? But then we, meaning myself and other people that were there at the time, we aren't happy with that on its own. We got to change it. Why do we have to change it? I don't know the answer to that. It doesn't make any sense to change it. That's like Kurt Hennig's son has never been able to use the word Hennig. What you let the Flair on TV, right? You got other second generation guys, but Hennig doesn't make it, which makes no sense. So there's a selective process, is my point in saying this, and I don't know what the answer is. It just seems to be misguided thoughts, and it almost reeks of insecurity to me. But Al got the gimmick over. They sold merchandise. And of course, in that defiant 18 to 34, 18 to 49 male demographic, if you can talk about head in a public environment and not get slapped or arrested, it seems like it's pretty cool for them. And that's what it was.
Talk to me a little bit about that. We're talking about the differences, and what this guy's allowed to do versus that guy's allowed to do. I feel like we're tiptoeing a little bit. Is this all Vince or is this someone else?
No, it's Vince. That's Vince. He may say he's just uncomfortable with something and give that challenge to the creative staff or the agents or whatever to get an idea. But the beginning of that conversation and that action starts and ends with him. So for whatever reason, it's like he used to say, you can't be half pregnant. You either got to go all the way with it or not. He said that to me a zillion times, seemingly, a bunch. But on this deal, I don't understand. It's selective. It's really selective. And it amazes me. It still amazes me at names that are changed. Yet talent's coming to WWE now that had great names internationally. Finn Balor, new name. Why? Well, we want to own it. Okay. So, but the thing that people forget is that if you come with another name in WWE and you sign a contract, while you are under contract with the company, the WWE controls the right to that name, whether it be your real name or not, because you're under contract. They manage that name. They manage that intellectual property. So there was always protection there. But again, so it may not be all legal. It just may be egocentric and that nothing exists outside the umbrella of WWE, which, as they are proving now, and AEW is proving that, and Ring of Honor and all these other places, that ain't true anymore. There are other games in town, whether people want to admit it in WWE or not. And fans like that. Give them a choice. But I thought Al got shortchanged in that deal. And as I said before in another show, Al's a very fundamentally sound guy. He became one of our best coaches. He's doing a great job right now in OVW in Louisville, where he owns that company now. Bought it from Danny Davis. So Al had a lot of skills, and I think we cut short the head thing. And nobody likes to get cut short in the middle of the head. It never works.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's get to the next match. That's X-Pac and Owen Hart. X-Pac gets the win in 8.5 minutes. Mark Henry does a little interference. He's going to come out and splash X-Pac. Of course, X-Pac and Owen Hart are both part of the Nation of Domination. China starts arguing with Henry. Eventually Vader comes out, does the big body block on Henry. And then Vader takes a tumble himself doing it. While it's going on, China gets in the ring, gives Owen a DDT. The ref turns around. X-Pac gets the pin. 2.5 stars. Meltzer liked it, said the wrestling was good, but he said the match had no heat. He felt like the crowd was not really into this one. What'd you think of the match? You haven't seen this one in a long time. It's a rematch, believe it or not, from King of the Ring 94. Back then, Owen beat the 1-2-3 Kid on his way to winning the tournament. And their brief feud is going to end after this match here. Two all-time greats in the ring, bell to bell. But the match was, I don't know, maybe a little disappointing. Was it overbooked or what was your opinion?
Well, it was added on late. There was no build to it. It's hard to go back to a 94 return, a match that was returned for 94 and 98.
Right.
This didn't work unless you're Fraser Ali. It don't work. But both those guys, Owen and Sean Waltman, X-Pac, 1-2-3 Kid, whatever. Two of my favorite workers, two of my favorite guys. I love both those guys. Sean's got his podcast going. He's straightened up his life and he's doing well. I'm proud of him. I love him. But nobody came to see that match. He had no advertising, had no promotion, had no advance, nothing. It just dropped out of thin air. And here it is, because again, the show was a little bit underwritten. We had injury issues. We needed the time. And there's anybody that should not have any problem saying that, well, under normal circumstances, the match between Sean Waltman and Owen Hart would have been anything but excellent, unless it's cold and there's no story and it's not featured. The match, this show was about three things. It was about the new King of the Ring. Number two, it was about the Hell in a Cell. And number three is about the First Blood. And I'm not so sure that when it's all said and done that the number one and number two didn't trade places, because the Hell in a Cell became, immortal in that respect. Sorry, Hulk.
Yeah, this is a bit of a one-match show, but we're not there yet. Let's keep it going. An unannounced match again. The New Age Outlaws are going to get a win over the Midnight Express to retain the tag titles, 9 minutes and 54 seconds. The Midnight Express here, this is the new Midnight Express. You may remember that this is, maybe not the best idea they've ever had. But they are acknowledged as being the NWA Tag Team Champions, even though the NWA gimmick had at this point not been acknowledged. But they do acknowledge that Billy and Bart were former wrestling brothers. So, of course, Billy Gunn, part of the New Age Outlaws, Bart Gunn, now part of the Midnight Express with Bob Holly. Jim Cornette here is involved, and you and I have never really talked about this, but I know he's a huge Midnight Express fan, being part of that legendary trio. He had to be a big NWA fan, but God, this sucked. And when did Cornette know it sucked? Was he for it until it happened and then he wasn't for it? What do you remember about the new Midnight Express? I don't know when we'll talk about him again.
Yeah. Cold match again. It wasn't the Midnight Express.
Right.
It was Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. and so for us to saddle two guys who are both tough, fundamentally sound dudes. I mean, two son of bitches that if you come hell or high water, they're going to be at work. A lot of respect for Bart Gunn and for Bob Holly. But my goodness, it's just, none of those things ever work. I've used this illustration before. Old school wrestling fans remember Sifi Afi as a Samoan guy. I think it might have been a fake Samoan. Hell, I don't know. But he was going to be the next Jimmy Snuka. So the only thing worse than if you got somebody named, instead of Jimmy Snuka, you got somebody named, Mini Snuka or whatever. It's a ripoff. Nobody, it never gets over. So the new Midnight Express was going to shit the bed. Cornette knew it was going to shit the bed. It wasn't Dennis and Bobby. It wasn't Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane. The only commonality of that whole deal is you had Cornette and his tennis racket there. That's it, and the name.
Right.
So nobody took it seriously. It was added to the card, and the Midnight had we didn't do them any favors. So, because I'm not going to say, well, they weren't either one good workers. They were both excellent workers. But again, there were no vignettes. There's no introduction. There was no anticipation, no nothing. So how could anybody expect that match to be really good with no story? It's not going to happen. I was not surprised, Conrad, that the match didn't get over, because my question to you, and I'll answer this question, how could it?
Right. The thing that you mentioned sort of at the top of the show is that the company is enjoying all this great success because the talent feels comfortable with this open door policy with Vince. Clearly, Bart Gunn and Bob Holly don't necessarily fit into that category where they're speaking up, but Jim Cornette could have. Jim Cornette used to book at the house on a regular basis. So why does Cornette raise his hand and say, God damn, this sucks and we shouldn't do it this way. And if we're going to, we've got to pass the torch. We've got to tell a story. We've got to have vignettes. Or at this point, is Cornette just fucking burnt out and ready to do his job and collect the check, go home?
No, I don't think he's ever been that way. The latter. I think that he did raise his hand. I think he did make some, discuss it, but it's the old deal where, I'm thinking Russo probably had a good rapport. Bob Holly and Bart Gunn. He sees those guys. Can we recreate something that had a good name identity? It just was never going to work in that regard. But a lot of guys, and I probably was in that group too, you give the benefit of the doubt to two guys that deserve the opportunity to get a push and to get promoted. So I was always for that. So if you could repackage Bart and Bob Holly, then I'm all for that. But why in the goddamn hell did we have to give them the name the Midnight Express?
Right.
It made no sense. So I'm sure Corny is not bashful about expressing himself. I think that's things like that may have been part of the cause that he detests Vince Russo so much nowadays. But it just ill-conceived, was never going to work. And I hate to sound like a naysayer. I know it all. I don't know it all. But give them another name.
Yeah.
How about that, Einstein? Just give them a goddamn another name. Why do they have to be the Midnight Express? Because we got Cornette? Well, then Cornette can manage them with another name. He could say, this team reminds me of my Midnight Express. They're that good. But nope, we give them the same damn name. Didn't make no sense.
So in the future, if you're keeping score at home, if you put the word new in front of it, it's not going to get over.
Nope.
Next up, we've got Shamrock and Maivia. This is the King of the Ring tournament finale. The winner is going to be your King of the Ring. And of course, we know that's Ken Shamrock. It takes him 14 minutes and 9 seconds to get the win. It's their third pay-per-view match between the two in 1998, and it's just June. The first one was Royal Rumble. Of course, the rematch was at WrestleMania, and now this one. So there's a trilogy of pay-per-view matches, and it does feel like Shamrock is poised for a big push here. Hunter Hearst Helmsley is doing commentary at ringside, and you may ask yourself why that is. Well, twofold. We're trying to keep this angle with Rocky Maivia going. Of course, they're going to square off in a ladder match at SummerSlam in a couple of months. But most importantly, he is the person who won King of the Ring 97, which we covered last year. The match was pretty good. 3.25 stars. What'd you think of the match? And then I want to talk to you a little bit about why more wasn't done with Shamrock. Yeah, I've asked Bruce this a lot. It does feel like if you're paying attention, to the way the rise of Shamrock goes here, he becomes King of the Ring champion. He wins this trilogy with Rocky Maivia. They're all on pay-per-view. He seems like a bankable guy. Fans are believing him as a badass and the world's most dangerous man, but he doesn't ever really get a spot against Austin, which feels like maybe a lost opportunity. Before you comment on that and give me your 2 cents, what'd you think of this match with The Rock here in their last match of the trilogy?
I liked it. I liked the match. Very athletic, kind of unpredictable, because you really thought that the deck was so stacked against the world's most dangerous man that somehow or another he would not make it to the finish line, because Rock was a big member of the Nation of Domination and strength in numbers, et cetera, et cetera. But the goal was always to try to get Kenny over, and Rock being the heel. Now, if the roles have been reversed, I'm assuming Rock would probably gone over, but Vince was willing to try something different. There have not been a lot of babyface King of the Ring winners. Bret Hart in '93, I think, was one, obviously, but after that, there were few and far between to this point in that 5-year period. So, but I enjoyed the match, and I thought it was a good match. And, for Shamrock to win with his finish, which was an ankle lock and a submission, I thought was extremely good booking, because we were getting to a point there where I think we could thank USC for a lot of that, because you saw some really tough big time stars in USC that were, getting tapped out or knocked out or TKO'd or whatever. So we found out that you could be a star and not lose your shine by losing to somebody's submission in pro wrestling, because we see it on a regular basis in USC. So it became a little bit more, realistic. So Rock tapping to the ankle lock, I thought was a hell of a finish. It shows he does business. He's a pro, and we got that holdover. So I thought they had a nice match, and the finish was a little bit surprising, because you're thinking, well, there'll be a miscue, there'll be something, and Shamrock will grab a quick one, as they say, inside cradle, roll up, whatever. But no, he beat him with his finish, which I thought was smart and right spot on. Now, the reason that Kenny had some issues, it's funny, Conrad. I was working with you at Starcast, and which I appreciate the opportunities as always. And I was sitting there on Sunday morning with Raphael Morphy, who just went to work for AEW, by the way. Congratulations to Raphael. And he and Kenny was there at your show. Looked great. He's got grandchildren, but he looks phenomenal. He's still active. And he came over, and we started laughing about the old days. And I had a situation where, he missed a town, and because he had partied a little heavy, and I think he had a couple of people, so they had some company, shall we say, in his room.
Sure.
And they all overslept. And I want to say, I might be wrong on this one, I want to say that he was booked in El Paso. And all due respect to El Paso and their great cuisine, there ain't a lot of flights getting in and out of there from where the hell we were. He missed his flight. The next flight was not going to get in there until after the show's over, so he didn't go. And so, that was a weekend deal. So, of course, I got to bring it to the principal's office, so to speak, on on Monday at Raw, and I can't do this. I give him a little fine, reprimand. Kenny got it. Reliability, buddy. If we can't rely on you to make the damn towns, how are you gonna get it? You want to push. You want to make a lot of money, right? Yeah, I deserve it. Well, the guys that deserve it go to work. And I always had Jerry Briscoe around just so he could pull Kenny off of me. He started to kill me. And then he missed another one several weeks, but in the same ballpark. So I sent somebody for him at a TV, and then I remember there's a loading dock, big loading dock, which are most of the buildings, but a big loading dock. So I tell Briscoe, I said, look, I got to go out and talk to Shamrock. He ain't gonna like what I got to say. If I ain't back in about 10 or 15 minutes, somebody come get me and take me to the hospital, will you? And kind of half-assed, tongue-in-cheek. But, he had a short fuse, man. He's a little unpredictable. I said, Kenny, we had this conversation. Apparently you didn't give a shit. Apparently I don't mean nothing in your life to where you're just going to do what you want to do anyway. But that's not how it's going to work here. So here's where we are. I'm going to fine you a week's pay for missing this town. And no, you would not have made nearly this much money on the payoff of the town. But I don't know any other way to reach you. So, and I think he was making at that time maybe $250, $300K. Let's say $250 on the low end. So about $5,000 a week. I said, so I'm going to find you your week. And I said, or we can part ways. And we can't do business this way. And I said, I talked to Vince about it. We're very disappointed. We see great things in you. And, he apologized, he was contrite, but he still cost him $5,000. And, we laughed about that, thank God. In Las Vegas, we did a flashback when we put me in the ankle lock. My fat ass wallowing around in Vegas. But we had a good chat. But he had matured. He's matured now. He's not doing guys don't understand, man. And I can tell you this from JR's point of view. I'm not the best drunk in the world. I could be a miserable bastard when I drink too much. And that's been pointed out by my late wife more than one occasion. And
no, how about this? You're just fucking mean. That's what you are.
No, I'm not. I'm not mean. I'm a lovable bastard.
Well, no, but when you're drunk, you're fucking mean.
I know. You want to do? I would blame it on my heritage. Cherokee Indian, man. You feel an Indian's firewater, and I could be. All of a sudden, I'm Vader size.
Hypothetically, though, if you've had, if you're in Las Vegas and you're drunk, for some reason, you're not mean there at all. It's weird how when you introduce a little something extra in there, you're not mean at all.
It's called a dispensary.
Yeah, there you go.
So see, folks, what you get on this program, you get a lot of extra stuff here, man. Tell your friends about us, will you? So anyway, Kenny got he got more responsibility. He was booked a lot. I mean, I had him booked. I mean, where we run a show, he's there. But I guess he got a little bit burned out on the road, and he had opportunities and significant offers to go back into MMA.
Right. And
in the MMA, instead of him wrestling 5 nights a week or 4 nights a week for WWE, he could fight 2-3 times a year in MMA and make good money and be home training, except for going for fight week or something. And so that's what we discussed. And, when he left, I said, the door's open. You come back anytime you want. We don't want to lose you, but you're welcome to come back. And he never made the circle never got completed, never did come back, but he ended up, good rapport with the company. But a lot of that's because he got clean and sober, because he's a different cat, man. He's just, he's threatening. I mean, he's a dangerous son of a bitch. And I got a good rapport with him now, thank God. But boy, he wanted to go back and fight. He felt like he left money on the table and he had unfinished business to do in the octagon or a cage or whatever. And so that's what happened. That's why the push kind of ceased. We had to kind of back off of it till we could figure out he's going to come to work on time regularly and not getting more, because there wasn't nothing else after after his week's pay getting fined. What's left? I'll tell you what's left. We'll terminate you.
Right.
Because the old Jimmy Johnson thing, I used to use it all the time, man. If I can't solve your problem, I have no choice but for us to eliminate it. That's what you give me. I got nothing. I got nothing left. So he had two chances, little fine, big fine. Now what's next? Next is out of here. And he didn't want that to happen. It was embarrassing, but I think he wanted to be home and fight. And so that's how that worked out. That's why the push was cut short. Well, I don't tell you, he was very, very close in becoming a megastar in WWE. Very, very close, in my opinion, of getting over in a big way. I'm talking about being at the top of the card at WrestleManias or whatever. People believed in him as they should have, because he was damn sure real. He wasn't playing the character of somebody with a fictitious name.
Right.
They didn't believe in. And he knew what he could do, and everything he did was so damn smooth and realistic. And so he was that close, man. I'm talking that close to becoming a major star. And losing him to go back to MMA hurt us. It wasn't a good thing, because we put a lot of money into him, a lot of time. So that was the deal on Kenny Shamrock, and I got all respect in the world for him nowadays. He's clean and sober. He looked great, clear-eyed. God dang, he still looks like he could whip anybody's ass in the room type thing. So big fan of Ken Shamrock, but we had to grow together, and we did.
So the next match is why we're really here. It's Undertaker and Mankind in a Hell in a Cell. You've got to go back to 1997 and you see the Undertaker take on Shawn Michaels in the very first Hell in a Cell match, October of 97. It really changed cage matches. Just a phenomenal match. It was a 5-star match in the Wrestling Observer, and everyone who saw it would agree. Just one of the absolute greatest matches of all time. And in that match, we saw Shawn Michaels about halfway down the cage take a bump through the announce table. And now the stakes have been raised. So we've got another Hell in a Cell, and Mick Foley is going to take it to a level that maybe it should have never been taken to. And we'll talk about it today, but nobody listening to this has not seen this match. One of the most famous matches in wrestling history, not just WWF or WWE history, but all of wrestling history. It goes 16 minutes. It's unbelievable. Most people remember when the Undertaker threw Mick off the cage. You said, good God Almighty, that killed him. As God is my witness, he's broken in half. And we've talked about that for years. You continued with this great commentary, and some people have said that the wrestlers play the music and the announcers provide the lyrics, and your lyrics here when he's getting off the stretcher are, how in the hell is he standing? And after he gets off the stretcher, some minutes after being thrown off the cell, look at this. He's got a smile on his face, for God's sake. Are you kidding me? He wants to go back up. After he's choke slammed through the roof of the cell, will somebody stop the damn match? After he's choke slammed again, enough's enough. The poor son of a bitch, he's broken in half. After he goes through the thumbtacks for the first time, good God, he looks like a human pincushion. I mean, this match is just one of wrestling folklore forever. And Mick Foley would write in his book, he had been tentatively scheduled to face Stone Cold at King of the Ring in a special Hell in a Cell match. Unfortunately, as I learned with the aid of a phone call, the feeling was that Foley Austin 3 wouldn't. Vince Russo broke the news, and as he did, I could feel my heart sink. I knew that Mankind wasn't over, but I was hoping that the office wouldn't catch on to the current apathy for a while. And Russo's comments made me realize they had. Quote, Cactus, we're just concerned that the audience won't buy another match with you and Steve. So I'm definitely out of the cell match, I said, with a whole lot of sadness in my voice. No, an excited Russo corrected me. You're still in the cell. It's just that it'll be you in there with the Undertaker. Now Austin will wrestle Kane for the title. Mick says he was overjoyed, but minutes after hanging up, he started to feel as if being in the cell was certain failure. I'm screwed, I thought. I suck inside a cage. Undertaker has a broken foot. No one cares about me. And besides, was the world really calling out for a 6th Undertaker Mankind pay-per-view encounter? At that point, I had no idea that it would become the most talked about match of my career. Before we move on with what Mick wrote, do you think that the match would have looked totally different had you went with the original creative of Mankind and Austin in a cage? Or do you think Mankind would have still, or Foley would have still kind of came around to this idea?
Oh, I can't, after seeing it, calling it, and being there, reliving it. Last year was the 20th anniversary of that match. So there was a lot of hubbub, a lot of scuttle talk, whatever you want to say. I can't see anybody else doing it. Taker and Mick on that night made magic. All the stars, the cliche, aligned, no doubt. Those two guys were always had good chemistry. One of the reasons, I've told you this before, Conrad, I use the old analogy of when the Lakers had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar playing on the low post for the Lakers. And if you're going to try to win the West in the NBA, you better be able to defend the low post and have a defensive mind, an Artis Gilmore type guy, somebody that could defend Kareem. Well, we had a 7-foot baby face that was over, but we were running out of viable opponents that could actually pose a somewhat realistic and viable threat in the pro wrestling vernacular, in the ring and so forth. I can't see it being anybody else. I really can't. And the way that the Austin Kane match went with the Wild West show and all the blood and all the violence, and no cage was I thought extremely well done for what they had to follow. Austin and Kane, with Austin having that staph infection and being weak as a cat, as Richard Bowden would say, the old TV announcer at Shreveport in the Mid-South days, I felt like a plate full of piss. That's weak. A plate full of piss. I use that occasionally. Jim Cornette reminded me of that the other day, and we did a little promotion together. But it would not have been good. It's good. So I can't see it changing. I like what happened, and even though I don't condone how it came about with the injuries and so forth, but man, I can't. It'd be sacrilegious in a wrestling sense to even think of anybody else in that Hell in a Cell match in June of 1998, other than the Undertaker and Mick Foley. Just wouldn't work for me.
Let's keep it going. He says before the match, he sits down with Terry Funk, believe it or not, at Titan Towers, and has the video department get him the tape of Undertaker Michaels from Hell in a Cell 1, the October 97 match. And he says,
which, by the way, Conrad, excuse me, that was one hell of a match. Shawn and Taker in the Hell in a Cell. That match had a major part of the audience understanding that Shawn Michaels was not only a great flyer, high spot guy, the Hurricane Ranas, the drop kicks, the super kicks, stuff off the top, blah, 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 that a lot of smaller baby faces utilized, resourcefulness, et cetera, et cetera. But man, he proved how tough he was, because in our commentary, I think that came out very well in that show. And I didn't even mention that. Shawn Michaels proved to the world that he was not just sizzle. There was a lot of stake in his game. And that match with Taker in that Hell in a Cell was a major part of that transformation and evolution of Shawn Michaels' in-ring persona. He was no longer just a technique guy. He was a tough son of a bitch. And he proved that in that match. Great. If folks have not seen that match, it's worth your time, because they really, two of the greats of all time, two Hall of Fame guys, two people that we'll always talk about in wrestling. They had one of their best nights together at that event. Now, back to, I diverted there, but the point being is that Foley and Taker had big shoes to fill, especially Mick. Mick had to play the role of Shawn Michaels. Now you do the math.
Yeah, that's tough. And Foley realized that. He says when they finished watching it, he and Funk, they go several minutes not saying a word. And then finally Terry speaks up and sort of mumbles, "Cactus, that one's going to be hard to beat." I know. Plus I'm 100 pounds heavier than Shawn. I just can't do some of the things in that cage that he can. And then they sat in silence for a couple of minutes, and then he broke the silence. "What do you think I should do?" And he's asking this of his friend, his mentor, and his hero, Terry Funk. And Mick would write, his answer would help make me professionally and damn near break me physically. Quote, "I think you ought to start the match on top of the cage." And Foley would say, "You would think I would know better than to listen to Terry Funk." And we continued to talk on the way to the show, but it was mostly joking around. "Goddamn, Cac," the Funker said, laughing, "maybe you should just let him throw you off the top of the cage." Yeah, I shot back. Then I could climb back up and he could throw me off again.
Well,
Man,
God damn it, that's not what I meant, Jack. Let him throw you off one time, for God's sakes.
so they're just sort of goofing around. And then he quietly says to Terry, I think I can do it. And he says he had told the Undertaker about a week out from the match that he was planning on starting the match on top of the cage, but Undertaker didn't seem real positive about that idea. And then he said, I had to tell him. Otherwise, if he walked out and saw me standing on the top and decided not to follow, he would look like a big dummy having to climb back down. So he asked him every day for a week, and every day he would shoot it down. And then the day before the match, he asked him again, and he shook his head and asked him a question. Not as the deep and dark Undertaker, but as a guy who had known him for 8 years and who over the course of some battles had developed a bond. And he said, Jack, why are you so intent on killing yourself up there? And he answered, because I'm afraid this match is going to stink. You can't walk, and let's face it, I don't have any heat. We've got a heck of a legacy to live up to, and I don't want this match to ruin it. If we can start it out hot enough, we can make people think we had a hell of a match, even if we didn't. Take your thought it over. And then he could see him cracking, and he said, I'll think about it. And they parted ways. Now let's get to the match. But before we do, I want to ask, did you hear the rumblings that they're going to start on top and he's coming off? Because these days the guys do a walkthrough. And so everything's sort of talked about with each other and the agents, and you know, they do this before doors open and fans can come in. Do you remember it ever being discussed ahead of time?
I thought it was just a absurd rumor and it just locker room talk, because it was unbelievable that somebody would even consider doing something like that. It was unprecedented. There was no way to do it safely. There was no way to execute that maneuver and do it safely. Now, some smart ass out there listening might say, well, they could have had they could have broken his fall with some kind of padding or whatever. Well, yeah, a lot of things could have. They could he could have been in a harness or something too. I don't know. It was silly, because you never want to put the talent in a position where it's not just simply a fact that there's no margin for error. There's going to be error. You can't do this and not hurt somebody. And the other issue is that we already had Austin with a bad elbow, bad wheels, neck. We got Taker with bone spurs, and his foot's all problematic. God dang, man, we didn't need to lose any more people. So I heard the idea, this casually discussed, along these lines. Hey, Jared, hear what Mick's latest idea is? I said, I'm afraid to ask. Well, he's thinking about doing something on top, not starting, he's thinking about doing something on top of the cage. So I didn't know how that was going to end or whatever. But I just thought, well, I'm trying to figure out in my mind, how can he do that and not kill himself, or at least be hurt and be off work for a while, and maybe for a long while. So I just blew it off. I didn't think any more about it. I thought, it's that absurd. It's not going to ever happen. So when it happened, I almost took a dump in my tuxedo.
Let's keep it moving here. He's talking about in his book, when he's on top of the cage, he comes out, he climbs up, and he's looking back at the aisle, and he sees the Undertaker's really cool entrance. And normally before, he has a big bump, he gets a little scared, but it's what he called a good scare. And he says, this is not a good scare at all. He says, in fact, I saw no chance for a happy ending. And I walked back to face the aisle, and Taker was about to ascend. This is it, I thought, showtime. And he grabs him by the shirt and trunks. And I'm picking it up here directly from his book. And suddenly I was airborne, 16 feet high and falling fast as the Spanish announcers dove for cover. It was the scariest moment of my life, but almost a relief when I landed on the announcer table and felt it crumple beneath my weight. I had missed the monitors, which was my biggest concern, and landed about as perfectly as one could hope for, but the impact had spun me halfway underneath a security railing so that my legs were in the audience. My upper body, meanwhile, was covered with debris of the table. At least, I mistakenly thought, as I enjoyed the attention, the worst is over. I was about as wrong in that assessment as a human being can possibly be. So before we talk about anything else that happened in the match, he talks about, as he's laying there, his shoulder's hurting. It's dislocated from the fall. He feels a dull pain in his kidney area, but he has this feeling of inner peace as people are trying to, work on him and help him because he knows he's pulled it off. One of the things I thought about for the first time a couple of years ago is what if he missed?
God, Conrad, disaster. I mean, he'd have been crippled and maybe worse.
It may be dead.
Oh yeah, exactly. The thing about it is, see, there was not, we were on the ring and all that stuff was on the ice. There's a little plywood thing, and that plywood would be the right word. It was a little thin wood that just for the ring and the chairs and stuff around the ice part of it was protected. There's no padding. So if he missed the table, whereas the table would not break his fall to some small degree, you can only imagine what would have occurred. It doesn't, quite frankly, I don't know how he would have survived it. I really don't. It may be this. It may be this. Maybe the worst case scenario for him, if he had missed, was he would have been crippled and confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his days. But the other side of that equation could very easily have been, it could have been a fatality. And so that's why hey, look, everything you heard me say, man, was unrehearsed. I didn't write shit down. I never did that. And I didn't know I didn't know he was going to go off, and I was mad. I was pissed off how we as an administrative group from creative, whether it be Russo or the agent of that match or whatever it was, that we allowed that to happen. I was pissed off. It made no sense in the big picture. And I guarantee you, if you go back and watch that pay-per-view, folks, watch when McMahon came out to check on Mick, breaking his heel persona, you'll see a genuine concern on Vince's face, because he had realized that Mick's moving around, he's moving his legs, moving his arms, not knowing about the kidney and all this other stuff. I don't think he probably even knew that his shoulder was dislocated. But Vince had as strong a look of concern as I've ever seen him have, because we knew that we probably made a mistake in doing that, and we knew that he knew probably the same as me that we dodged a big-ass bullet.
I mean, I hate to be that guy, but if he misses and his head hits the guardrail, that could have immediately killed him right away.
Yeah.
Snaps his neck. He's done. I mean, I hate to make a race comparison because I'm not a race guy, but I remember when Dale Earnhardt died, I saw the crash and I thought, well, I mean, it's not a spectacular crash. It's not end over end. It's not this glamorous, fiery tumble that we've seen in NASCAR when guys walk away. So I, like a lot of folks, assumed, oh, he's going to be fine.
Yep.
But that was the end. And it was because, I mean, his neck was broken and that was a wrap. And if his head hits that guardrail with that amount of distance at that weight, at that height, I mean, this could be another tragedy instead. I mean, it was no easy task as it is. And Mick would write, climbing the cell with a dislocated shoulder was no easy task, but this time I wasn't scared or hesitant. I was running on adrenaline. I was literally flying in my heart as the Undertaker and I raced to the top. The crowd reaction was unbelievable. They had sworn the match was over, but they had just seen the damnedest thing in the history of the business. And now we were going to give them more. I mean, when you see him get off the stretcher and climb up again, what's going through your mind?
I thought, well, somebody's going to pull him off the side of the cage. Surely this is not something that's booked. Cause I don't know that it was booked that way. I don't know. I don't know this very day that the plan was, okay, we're going to throw Mick off the top of the cell. He's going to go through the announce table. He's going to, the ice of the igloo where the Penguins play is going to break his fall. Wink, wink. And then if he survives that, we're going to do another spot where he put his ass back up top so he can fall through awkwardly, and which is, quite frankly, a lot of people say was more dangerous than the other deal, because he was in control of the other one where he could do his rotation, he could get turned, and he landed, as he said, about as good as you could land. Lucky as hell, missed all the monitors and so forth. But then to go back up it was unheard of. I was appalled that it happened. I was scared. So what are we doing to this guy? Have we just come up with every crazy ass thing we could get him to do. And because Mick is Mick, he's not going to say no. So I was angry, man. I was pissed off, and I didn't see the response. I didn't see even in the beginning, people getting out there quick enough. And nowadays, there's a doctor at ringside, and all these. WWE does a great job taking care of their athletes in that respect. But boy, then there were some holes in our armor in that regard. So I was pissed off. I just didn't make any sense. You got to understand, I was pissed off as the TV announcer JR. I was pissed off as the EVP of talent Jim Ross. We got a great commodity, a great asset, and we're just screwing with it. That's how I thought at that time. That was not exactly the case, but in the moment of, Mick wasn't the only guy running on adrenaline, especially when he fell. I was on that side as best I recall, and he was a few feet when he hit. It was a horrid, and like you said, Conrad, what if this did not happen? What if he had hit his head? What if he didn't get the full rotation? And then going back up, he didn't have a chance to defend himself. He didn't have a chance to take a bump that would allow him some protection. And the way he landed was just sickening. I think maybe where I got my sickening thud over the years, because God dang, man, it just sounded like he was in a car wreck and got ejected out of the car, and there he lies again in a heap. What else can we do to this poor bastard?
He would say if he could change one thing about the match, it would be his next effort, which was a dynamic exchange of punches atop the 16-foot structure that would have sent the crowd into a frenzy. But instead, he stood there, slug-like, as the Undertaker battered him without any retaliation. Quote, he clubbed me across the back with a chair and then unceremoniously dropped it on the cage. I really wish he would have put it somewhere else. Then he grabbed me around the neck for the goozle or choke slam, and I don't remember a thing about the next 2 minutes as I watched the tape in great pain the next day. It was the only time in 15 years I'd been knocked out cold. I'd been knocked goofy countless times. I'd seen stars and rainbows and black patches as a way of life for a long time, but this was the first time that a period of time elapsed and I wasn't aware of it. Like I said earlier, however, video and time have helped me not only see, but remember almost everything except what I was feeling as I broke through the mesh and crashed to the canvas. Looking back at it now, it was both the worst choke slam and the best choke slam I'd ever taken. The worst because it was the only time in my association with the Undertaker that I hadn't even gone high for the goozle. As a matter of fact, one of my feet never left the cage. The best because if I'd taken it correctly, I might very well have been dead. As it was, I landed hard on my back, my neck, and the back of my head. If I'd gone higher, I would have landed directly on my head and probably wouldn't be here, or at least not in control of my limbs. It was indeed a violent, brutal fall, made worse by the fact that I landed in one of the old Federation rings, which had very little give.
Yeah, we changed that scenario not too long after that. Those rings were for those super heavyweights that dotted the WWE landscape back in that one era time. And, you got a big Hulk Hogan was the top baby face, and all these big heels coming in, to match up, the Bundys of the world and so forth. That ring was hard as a rock, and talents hated it. When I first got that job, that's one of the things guys said, well, I hope JR, you will address the goddamn rings. And I did. And so we got a more bump friendly ring. I'm sure they're still using the same rings today, but they're more talent friendly for sure. But those rings are, God dang, it was embarrassing that we didn't change the rings earlier, because the styles of more bumps and more high risk bumps were becoming more prominent. And so we did that. But the Mick thing was certainly a catalyst to help us move to that direction in a very rapid pace. As that Vince said, get rid of all those hard son of bitches and let's, get a different ring and blah, blah, blah. Vince's only issue was he didn't want a ring that was so noisy that was distracting. But we got rings that are bump friendly and almost too late, but we got it done.
To make matters worse, Mick would write, the chair was placed on the cage and it followed my body down and smashed into my face from a height of 12.5 feet. The blow to my face would result in 1.5 teeth being knocked out, a dislocated jaw, and a hole beneath my lip that I could stick my tongue through. Francois and the EMTs tried to help me as I lay on my back and my arms outstretched and my legs sickly twisted to one side. I later asked the Undertaker what he thought when he looked down at me from atop the cell. His answer was chilling in its simplicity. I thought you were dead. Terry Funk was there to meet him and willingly took a choke slam to give me one more time to get up. TV showed multiple replays of my falling through the cage, and when they came back, I was on my feet, but just barely. I don't believe it, said a stunned JR. He's either crazy or the toughest SOB I've ever seen. Before we keep going, I do want to ask you here, JR. Was Mick Foley the toughest man you ever met in wrestling? I mean, I know there's lots of stories about badasses and, you know, this guy or that guy, but has anybody ever taken more punishment than Mick Foley in wrestling?
Not that I have encountered. There's a difference in being tough, and there's a context we're talking about here, and being the baddest dude in the land.
Sure.
You know, Mick Foley's not the baddest dude in the land, as he will readily admit, but I've never seen, if he's a classic definition, Conrad, of being tougher than a $2 steak. He is, and I've never seen anybody that was in so much pain. More often than not, he was in pain all the time, and he was in pain and he had been in pain a lot, but more often than not, before we hired him. You know, he's taking elbows off. He's slamming a guy on the outside. There's no mats out there. He gets on the outside. He runs down the apron of the ring and does a big flying elbow, and his hip would always hit the concrete to break his fall. And you can do that once, maybe. Hell, he did it on a regular basis, seemingly for years. So you can only imagine how that pain manifested itself over time. So, yeah, if there's somebody tougher in the respect of standing, being able to withstand pain, I never met him. Mick's at the top of the list.
It's unbelievable. The Undertaker threw a punch. Meltzer, Foley would write, and I went down slowly. It may have been the saddest bump ever taken because there was no strength left in my body. I don't want to sound dramatic or pat myself on the back, but I really had been standing on sheer will alone. Now, as I lay in a heap, it seemed that even my will was gone. Jack, let's go home, the Undertaker quietly said to me. No, I'm okay, I replied. Of course, Taker winds up winning the match. And as we know, there was a thumbtack bump and just all kinds of craziness. And Mick would write, I lay there for a few minutes, and as Francois, the Funker, and referees checked on my condition, the EMTs brought a stretcher to the ring, and he asked Mike Chioda, and you can see this on camera, was I already on a stretcher once tonight? And Chioda says, yes, Jack, you were. And then he says, then can you help me up? I don't want to be on a stretcher twice in one night. Which is unbelievable. But as he's helped to the back with Chioda and Terry Funk assisting, the fans start to chant Foley, Foley. And JR summed it up. How can anyone not admire the effort of this man, mankind, Mick Foley, is beyond me. And he would write, when I walked through the curtain, I was met by a sound of applause from the remaining wrestlers and a hug from Vince McMahon. Despite recent media portrayals of Vince, he was genuinely concerned with my well-being. I responded by talking way too much, way too fast, and way too intelligent for a guy who had just been through hell. He had to have known that I was messed up. I was almost like a drunk driver who tries too hard to act sober that he gives himself away. My in-ring conversation with Mike Chioda was not the only one I failed to recollect. Several days after the match, I asked the Undertaker if I had spoken to him afterwards. He laughed as he recalled our conversation. Did I use thumbtacks out there? Is apparently what I'd come out with. He looked at me, still covered with the damn things, and said, yes, you did, Jack. Yes, you did. Oh, good, I replied, and walked away. His evening's not over yet, though. Francois has to put his shoulder back in his socket, and he's got to help get his bearings. And I can't believe this is real, but he's going to come back out for the main event. This is not the main event, unbelievably. We've still got another match on this show. Kane is going to win the world title from Steve Austin, which on any other show would be all anybody talks about. It's Kane's first world title win. He just debuted with the company in October, and fast forward, 6 or 8 months, and he's now beating the hottest act the company ever had in a first blood match. As a result, it doesn't matter what type of effort these guys had in the match. No one talks about it because of the match that just happened before, but Meltzer gave it 3.25 stars. It is interesting because it's a first blood match with a guy who is completely covered, including a mask. But maybe that's why, they're trying to paint the story they are, that of course he's got to overcome all these incredible odds, including being covered. But even after all the hell that Mankind's been in, he comes out for this match, as does the Undertaker. In hindsight, JR, did Mankind coming back out add to the story, or should that have been fucking it?
Well, again, I was squeamish of the whole damn thing, but I would have said no, because in today's WWE, in today's probably a lot of other companies, he would not have had the opportunity to come back out no matter what was booked.
Right.
Because again, we've not talked about anything about concussions here. We haven't talked about concussion protocol. We haven't talked about CTE, none of that stuff. So knowing what we know now from a medical standpoint, these athletes and these head injuries, these traumas, there's no way he would have been cleared to go back out there. So I believe that, did he add to the end? Yeah, and especially where we're going with other things and other programs and so forth. Yeah, that made sense. But could that have been done on another night? Of course it could have, some way. So I believe that he should have been shut down at that point. And in today's world, he absolutely would be. And I agree with that, today's world. Who knows, man, how many, often, that always troubles me about Mick, is as the older he gets, is he going to be good with his mind? Are all these concussions and chair shots and all these amazing things that he's done to his body, what toll is it going to take on him in the future? And that concerns me. To this very day, it concerns me. So answer your question, easy for me. No, he would not have been sent back out. They'd have called a little bit of an audible. That'd been easy to do. Bottom line is, Mr. McMahon was going to facilitate the win, blah, blah, blah. So, but that's just Mick, man. Mick is a player's coach, a great coach, great player to coach for those guys and creative and so forth, because he'll do anything. And he's got good logic about doing things that he can do well. But we needed to shut him down on that deal, and we didn't. And thank God, he didn't get hurt any worse out there, I don't guess. But it was scary to see him back out there. And God Almighty, if we wanted to turn him babyface at some point, and we did, those are all these great reasons that people start believing in Mick. He's tough, he's amazing, he does things nobody else can or will do, and he survived it somehow. So. No, for me, in today's world, shut down. You're done. Go take a shower. Let's get you to the hospital.
Mick would write in his book that Vince came to see him in his locker room and said, "Mick, I want you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for this company, but please promise me that I'll never see you do anything like it ever again." I do want to mention too, this main event with Kane. On the build up to this first blood match, the stipulation is if Kane loses, he's going to set himself on fire and breathe his last breath. But we know that doesn't happen. He becomes the world champion. Vince McMahon, or Mr. McMahon, is very pleased with that. And the next night on Raw at the Gund Arena in Cleveland, it's another sellout, 16,505 fans, an incredible gate, 266 grand. The show opens with Vince, Briscoe, and Slaughter coming out to present Kane with the world title. Interestingly enough, it's not the same quote unquote big eagle, the new design that Austin had been using. It is the old school Reggie Parks made winged eagle that Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and guys like that held before Austin. Later in the show, of course, we know Austin is going to pin Kane to win the world title for the second time. And the Undertaker comes to the ring during the match. And after the match, he gets in the ring. Austin gives him the stunner. That sets up the collision course for SummerSlam, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point. Talk to me about the creative to have Austin lose the title on pay-per-view and then win it back the next night. Is this normally these surprises, these quote unquote swerves were for television. Why the title change on a pay-per-view? Is it just to set up the rematch for Raw and pop a big rating? Cause if so, it works. Raw does a 5.36 and Nitro does a 4.05. It winds up being the third highest rating in the history of Raw up to that point.
Oh, well, that finish, the first blood finish The first time I was exposed to the first blood finish, Conrad, was in the Mid-South Territory. We had a 300-pound top babyface named the Cowboy Bill Watts. And he was very strategic in how he lost. Because I said, why are you building I asked this question out of ignorance, I guess. Why are you building everything around you? And he said, kid, I'm the only son of a bitch here I can depend on. And he said, everything I got is riding on this territory. Okay, that makes sense. But the first blood stipulation was set up to get a win for the other guy, not the bleeder, the other guy. And more often than not, it was the other guy, the heel, using brass knucks or a foreign object or whatever, and helping get the color or a post shot or whatever. Back in those days, running a guy's head or body into the ring post was a disqualification. Now, even a clenched fist is okay. And sometimes people wonder why the business is not so emotional or so dramatic, because there's no goddamn rules anymore. People say, why do we need rules? So the goddamn heels have something to break. And they don't do it in front of if you do it in front of the referee, it means nothing. It means nothing. It just makes no sense. So the old first blood thing was an old territory finish. It was a way to protect the baby face and still get the win on the heel. And that's kind of the situation there with Steve and Kane. We didn't want to beat Steve in a 1-2-3 type situation, so it came up with the stipulation, a gimmick match, if you will. And it seemed to, it had a lot of drama. The fans liked the blood. We were doing a little bit of blood then, more than probably maybe should have. But nonetheless, the Attitude Era had a lot of juice in it for that time. So I just it was a good finish for that. It protected Steve. It didn't hurt Kane, and it facilitated Vince's role as, I'm the most powerful son of a bitch here, Steve. You're not. Austin, this is my company. I'm the boss, and you're going to work for my ass. And some of these days, I'm going to break you. That was the whole deal. So I didn't have a problem with the finish. Now, I don't remember what our dialogue was, but I believe the decision to put the belt back on Steve the next night was something that we had discussed going into this thing at a pretty good time in advance. Once the first blood stipulation was finalized, we knew that Austin was going to lose the title. Now, so the question was always, when does he get it back? And Vince's idea was, well, he's going to get it back Monday night. So that was a deal. I don't know. Everything done on TV is for a rating. When we go on in October, when AEW goes on TNT on a weekly basis, it's going to be about the ratings. That's the nature of the business. It's still about the ratings for WWE on Monday night. Ratings. They follow that stuff like crazy, as they should. But I think that, I don't know if it's specifically for the ratings, but the ratings are always a component that has to be taken into consideration. And for those of us who try to say, oh, it's not, it wasn't ratings, it's all creative, that's bullshit. Ratings are always the top priority.
Well, and they're our top priority here. We hope that you guys are leaving us a 5-star rating and telling your friends to hit that subscribe button and telling them about the great episode that was King of the Ring 1998. I had a lot of fun today and hope you did too. And hope you'll tune in next week when we're going to revisit the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, as only Jim Ross can explain. They spent decades together, and as we're remembering him this week, it feels fitting that we're going to pay tribute to him next week.
And ironically, Conrad, now I'm working for his son, Cody, in AEW, and other people too. But Cody's a big part of what I do, and I'm so happy I got that opportunity. I'm even happier that I got to call the Cody Dustin match at Double or Nothing. It was one of the best matches I've ever called, not because of my work, because of the performance of the talents, the setup, the whole 9 yards. And I can only speculate, but I can do it pretty convincingly, that the Dream was watching and he loved it, because it had some juice, it had some violence, it had some aggression. They told those kids, two kids to me, those two dudes told a great story. And so I'm almost going full circle now with the Rhodes family. I'm back with them, and that'll add to our storytelling next week. I can't wait to have that show, because it's one of my favorite topics. for a guy that had a body like the dream to be a superstar globally. I saw a thing on Twitter this week, some old footage in Japan, and I'm on Twitter at JRSBBQ. Conrad, hey, it's Conrad, right? Conrad,
that's right. You nailed it.
Hey, it's Conrad. Great. Conrad's a great follow. I ain't bad. But I saw footage of him, Dusty him, making a goddamn it, JR. Goddamn pronouns will kill us, goddamn it. It starts with us. That he made a comeback. He being a Dusty again. God dang. Why have you chewed out twice now on this thing? Goddamn, pal. That he made a comeback on Stan Hansen and Hulk Hogan. And it is a hell of a piece of footage. It does two things. It shows you how heels feed a comeback and how an impassioned baby face does it. Because Dusty was delivering those bionic elbows, and Stan Hansen and Hulk Hogan were feeding and selling like two drunk men. It was amazing. But that's the charisma Dusty had. And for those that haven't ever followed it, we'll talk about it next week. I'm telling you that I'm a big fan of tag team wrestling, and what's no secret here. But I'm also going to tell you that one of the top 5 teams I ever saw in my life was the Texas Outlaws, Murdoch and Rhodes. They were, Dick Murdoch and Dusty were just absolutely amazing. They were magical. So we'll talk about that too. So it should be a great show. And, you know, just going through Dusty's life before he got into to wrestling, he went to goddamn Everett College in Texas for about a semester. It was just funny. You tell those stories, you know. He never went to class, just played ball. So then his grades would come in at the end of the semester and he'd flunk. So he was ineligible now the next time. So he'd go to another school, start over, same deal. He was funny, man. And a lot of people don't realize, Conrad, Dusty was a hell of a baseball player. That body he may not look like a baseball player. That son of a gun was a great baseball player. Plus, he won $100 for me playing horse in Jimmy Crockett's driveway. I might have been drunk, but I'm not going to say right now. I'll say that for next week.
Listen, there's so much. You can just tell the passion in your voice talking about Dusty Rhodes. Next week's going to be a great episode. Today was a great episode. Tell your friends about the new format here on Jim Ross's podcast, Grilling JR. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and we'll see you next Thursday and every Thursday at 6 a.m. Eastern right here on the mighty Westwood One with Grilling JR.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.